Listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The labor movement's drive to raise the wage for workers is especially critical for working women, especially women of color. Women fill the ranks of low-wage workers even as they are paid less across the board than men. AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Liz Schuler recently spoke to the National Women's Law Center about working women's need for a voice on the job. She said asserting that voice will raise the wage for millions of women while improving working conditions for working people, but only if workers unite in solidarity and demand it.
We need to join together and speak out for good wages, great benefits, fair scheduling, and equal pay at work. We need to demand paid sick leave, paid family leave, and quality childcare. And these things are accessible and are available to us if we stick together. We need to make our voices heard because the status quo is not working. A typical woman who works full-time loses more than $500,000 over her lifetime because we are paid less than men. $500,000. That's staggering. Women are the majority in low-wage jobs. Women have a greater responsibility at home, but if we don't have the benefit of a union, we're unlikely to have earned sick leave or paid family leave.
Schuler says the labor movement has historically been too slow to address the racial economic disparity being experienced by women of color.
Women of color experience lower median weekly earnings, higher rates of poverty, and greater unemployment. While women overall make 79 cents on the dollar, I think it just went up, Black women and Hispanic women only make 63 cents and 54 cents respectively. Yet the women's movement and, let's face it, the labor movement have been slow to address these issues. Feminists, we've got to stand up for all working women.
The Chicago Teachers Union is encouraging its members to save money to weather a possible strike. Thousands of teachers in Chicago are facing layoffs starting as early as January. The union says Mayor Rahm Emanuel's hand-picked school's CEO has plans to lay off 5,000 teachers and claims that the layoffs could start in January. The Chicago Teachers Union says mass layoffs only exacerbate the current 50% teacher turnover rate. On Thursday, the union will hold an official practice strike vote in all Chicago public schools. A teachers' union rally is set for November 23rd in Grant Park. Labor contract talks are in mediation as negotiations on a new contract continue.
Workers Independent News is heard daily on The Rick Smith Show, live 3 to 6 p.m. coast to coast at thericksmithshow.com. The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
WIN is made possible in part through underwriting support from the United Steelworkers. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
This town gonna be here long after I'm gone. East side, west side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they still rock on. Oh, and this time is my time. All right, love or hate, it don't matter. I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my time.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots of things to get to, lots to talk about. The historic election that was yesterday. Amazing day for working people across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. 3 Supreme Court justices on the court that now understand working class values. That is going to be huge going forward. Finally, a court that will care, will think about, will know what it's like to be average, everyday working folk like you and me. I think that is enormous. And the other part of this, in my view, and we'll talk about this throughout the day, a pushback against the General Assembly here in Pennsylvania and the Republicans who keep holding the budget hostage. And I go back to right at the beginning of Tom Wolf's term as governor. You had the majority leader, you had the speaker, you had all of the Republican muckety muck bigwigs going, we're doing nothing until we get what we want first. And I will not forget that. And I hope you don't either. What's going on in Harrisburg over the budget is purely like a 2-year-old who's got it in their head they want candy. Nothing else can happen. No breathing, no nothing. Kicking, screaming, that kind of stuff, yes, but nothing sane, nothing rational. That's what we're seeing. The 2-year-olds are not getting what they want, and I think the voters here in the Commonwealth see that. And I think that played a little bit into the election results last night, which in my view, nothing short of historic. Also, some lessons to be learned. If here in Pennsylvania, you're going along the lines of, this could have some bit to do with what's going on with the budget. I look at Kentucky as the perfect example of running away from who you are and expecting to win, as Jack Conway basically got thumped by the really crazy way out. And I don't even know that conservative is the right word to identify. I'm not sure that that's the right identifier. As far as conservatism has gone to the extreme, then yes, but not the conservatives of our grandparents and our parents' generation. No, these are a whole new brand and a new breed. And it'll be interesting to see because Mr. Bevin, the Republican there in Kentucky, has run on the platform of all you poor people, that Obamacare, no more. We're going to, and it'll be interesting to watch because Kentucky is one of those places where, you kind of said, this has been a success. A lot of people have signed up for healthcare. A lot of people have gotten into the exchanges. A lot of people have, because Conway was right out in front saying, we're going to do this. We're going to get people insured in our state because we care about them, because, that Christian value of lending a hand. This guy, the Christian conservative, going to snatch that away. It will be interesting to watch what happens in Kentucky over the next several months. A place I think we should be keeping an eye on. There were some other interesting bits around the country. Virginia had a chance to level out the Republican majority there. They failed on that. Ohio pushed back on the pot measure by 2-1. And part of it, from what I understand, is they wanted to set up like a pot monopoly. And there's some folks who are saying that had something to do with it. I just don't know that Ohio is ready for it. Some other things across the country. Houston voted soundly against the a city ordinance that would have allowed transgender folks to use the other bathrooms. I don't really care, to be honest. Not my thing. But I can see where, you might be a little leery. I don't know. But to me, Ohio, interesting place. The big one out of all of this. And the message for me last night, while a little bit you can look at the budget here, I think a lot of people looked at the gerrymandering that's gone on here in Pennsylvania and the cartoonish districts. And I make light of, and I've had a number of people who didn't realize what my 30th senatorial district looks like. And I've tweeted it out a number of times at Rick Smith Show if you want to check it out. Because it's really clownish. I mean, you've seen the Calvin, who goes over and he's taking a wee on something, be it the Chevy or the Ford or whatever. Now it looks like he's blowing a little bit of air out the back end, and I live in that air cloud in the back. And that's how they drew this. And I don't know if they drew it like that, thinking, oh, let's make something really silly. I don't know, maybe a drunken morning, goof. I don't know, but I don't know how you got to what they got to. And I think people like me and people who want to see good democracy, who want to see good governance, who want opportunities to vote and to see competitive races on ideas, not on who can raise the most money or draw Calvin cartoon figures like where I live. Ohio passed issue 1. which overwhelmingly, I mean, massively passed issue 1, saying, look, we want a process to draw the legislative districts and, end this idea of elected officials picking voters. We want voters choosing them. And, we don't want when one party has power that they maintain that power forever by jerry-rigging the system. And I think most people understand. And I think that's what this Supreme Court race here in Pennsylvania was about. Everybody that I talked to who had known about it, who were planning to vote, that was one of the reasons that they threw out, saying, look, the Republicans have grown too big for their britches here in Pennsylvania. They've grown too powerful. They've controlled the system for too long, and it's gotten us nowhere. We're in a situation where nobody sees a budget happening until who knows when. Because the governor is saying, look, we got to spend money on education when we've got to fix our revenue problem. The big boy in the room, the businessman, the man saying, look, this is what the books say. This is what we need to spend. We need to pay for it. And the children, our Republican friends saying, no, we want to do more gimmickry and more smoke and mirrors and more one-time fixes. And hey, let's sell off, these assets. And so that we can not have to raise taxes because that's our pledge. I think last night had a lot of that kind of in it, saying, you know what? We want our democratic process to be back into place where there are competitive races, where we talk about ideas. And there aren't absolute safe districts where you have people who do just some of the really craziest things. I mean, 10 years ago, if you would have said we'd be in a fight over selling off one of the most profitable assets the state has that puts money into the coffers so that we don't have to pay taxes on it, if someone would have said, this is what we're going to stake our entire government on, I would have said, no, it's not possible. The voters would not stand for it. And I think last night was the beginning of that. The voters would not stand for it. And it wasn't just Ohio either. And it wasn't just here in Pennsylvania. I look up in Maine as well. Maine passed a piece of legislation that they want to attempt to rein in the electoral process. And I think there's a lot of this sentiment going on around the country as the gerrymandering really has just gotten outrageous. I mean, you look here in Pennsylvania, for instance, where you had more than 500,000 Democrats go to the polls in the last federal election and end up with only 5 of the 13 congressional seats. If that isn't choosing your constituency, I don't know what is. When you're that badly outvoted and yet you still win the vast majority of the seats, there's a problem with the system. And that's not just here. That's across the country. And part of it is, look, the moneyed interest on the right, they're smart people. They look well down the road. They're looking not just to, the next election, they're looking to the next election after that, and strategizing long-term plans. I think this is one of the first times that we're hearing about 2020 well before 2020 and how important the Supreme Court here in Pennsylvania was. So good stuff. Up in Maine, though, they passed a piece of legislation that would increase fines and increase penalties on people who broke their election laws. Now, they up there have some landmark legislation. They call it the Clean Elections Act. So, you can have people running for office that aren't beholden to special interest and, to the well-to-do. And it increases transparency, put that sunlight, the transparency that puts that on special interest groups. And I think there's part of me that goes, maybe we need to be thinking about this as we move across the country. So big win last night, lots to talk about, lots to get to. Love to hear your thoughts. Did you vote yesterday? Most people didn't. 25% turnout in my neck of the woods. Curious how it went in yours. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend, attorney Erwin Aronson, going to break it down for us. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, And this is Labor History in 2. Got milk? If you lived in Neillsville, Wisconsin, the answer might have been no. And on this day in labor history, the year was 1933. Wisconsin was known as the dairy state. In the 1930s, it was the largest producer of milk in the country. The price of milk fell during the Great Depression, and farmers received a smaller percentage of the proceeds. A cooperative group of dairy farmers objected to the low prices set by the larger dairy plants. Farmers who produced milk for bottling remained solvent. However, farmers who produced milk for cheese, butter, and other dairy products were driven into poverty. Some dairy farmers banded together and decided not to sell milk unless a previously agreed upon price was met. They were vastly outnumbered, as many farmers sold at the reduced price. The strikers resorted to roadblocks to prevent delivery to the manufacturers. If a truck driver refused to turn back, the strikers forcibly dumped the milk at the roadside. Sometimes the strikers tainted the delivered milk with kerosene or oil. They also targeted creameries, causing damage to 7 during the strike. The state tried to break up the roadblocks or use convoys to escort trucks. Non-striking farmers attempted to deliver milk via railways, but some rail lines were also blocked by strikers. The October to November strike was the third in a series of milk strikes in Wisconsin. Thousands of gallons of milk were dumped. A 60-year-old farmer was killed at a picket line in one Wisconsin town. In all, farmers lost $10 million during the strike.
No milk today, it seems a common sight, but people passing by don't know the reason why. How could they know just what this message means? The end of my hopes, the end of all my dreams.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Behind the door, where my love brings.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Eric Woostwald. During the CNBC Republican presidential debate, moderator John Harwood noted that Senator Marco Rubio's tax reform plan disproportionately favors the rich over the middle class. After the debate, right-wing media figures attacked Harwood for his assertion. Here's Fox and Friends co-host Steve Doocy.
There was another example of media bias, and that is with the chief inquisitor last night, John Harwood. On the question regarding your tax plan, he flat out apparently lied about it.
Fox host Megyn Kelly also defended Rubio.
Rubio was going to let it slide, Chris. He had said, look, that's not right. He was going to let it slide and go on. Harwood interrupted him and said, no, Tax Foundation says it my way. And then Rubio says, no.
But Harwood's claim was correct. Factcheck.org showed that Rubio's plan gives more to the top 1% of earners. Bloomberg reported that Rubio's tax plan, quote, gives larger benefits to the richest Americans than to the middle class. And a Tax Foundation analysis showed that the plan could add $6 trillion to the national debt. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Standing tall against a multinational corporate agenda. The Rick Smith Show.
All the things you want are real. You have you to complete, and there is no deal.
So last night, the big historic election saw the seating of what are now going to be 3 Supreme Court justices: Kevin Dougherty, David Wecht, Christine Donahue. And in historic and overwhelming fashion. I watched the results coming in last night, and the 3 of them went out to an early lead, and it never got any closer than where it was at the beginning, which showed the overwhelming work of folks knocking on doors, leafleting, making phone calls, and doing the grassroots work that goes into this. And for me, the other part of this is hopefully, and I think this is going to be a good thing. They're going to restore some integrity back to the high court after some shenanigans with some emails and that thing with Ori Melvin, you may remember. Anyway, here to talk about last night's results, we've asked our good friend attorney Erwin Aronson to come talk with us. Erwin, thanks for taking time for us.
Good to be here, Rick.
So historic night. I mean, I from the beginning, I think I was shocked that out to an early lead and it never relinquished.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a significant lead. I mean, we're talking about 180,000 vote difference between the bottom of those three vote getters on the side of the winners and the top vote getter on the side of the losers.
So in looking at this, I mean, for me, one of the things that I think is important is that we restore some integrity, we restore some stability back to that high court after, this scandal with the emails and, a couple of years ago, that thing with Joan Ori Melvin. I think maybe little thoughts.
Well, I think that it is very promising. And part of the reason it's promising is that we have had a long and very, very troublesome period of the public not having any reason to have broad swath, universal confidence in the actions of that court, and with that, because it is the highest court in the Commonwealth, the actions of and access to justice within our judicial system. So that long, dark cloud, if you will, that has hung over what are a vast, vast majority, Democrats and Republicans alike, of quality, high integrity, ethical jurists at every level in Pennsylvania. That long, dark cloud is on its way to being behind us. The people of Pennsylvania yesterday elected 3 state Supreme Court justices and a Commonwealth Court judge and a Pennsylvania Superior Court judge, who are all people of the highest integrity, of the highest esteem, of the highest ethical commitment, who are individually and collectively systematically articulating a plan and a decision, calculated, focused decision, if you will, to restore the public's confidence in our system. And I say that recognizing that I have had a great deal of confidence in our system. And the reason I have confidence in our system is that, among other things, it has worked. Former Justice Joan Ori Melvin was removed from the bench initially as a suspension. She was tried in a court of competent jurisdiction. She was found guilty. She was removed from the bench. She is serving her time, and that demonstrated that she wasn't above the law, but she was very much subject to the law. And former Justice McCaffrey, after some accusations and an investigation by the Judicial Conduct Board, determined to resign his seat because he had been placed under a dark cloud himself. And we never got to learn whether or not any of the things of which he was accused really rose to the level of causing him to be, other than amicably removed, but the process again worked its will. And there we have it. But there is no doubt that people, particularly the vast, vast majority of the general public, who interfaces rarely, if at all, with our justice system, has faced a time when its confidence and its security and its good feeling, if you will, about our system has been compromised and maybe even shocked. And yesterday was the first step in confirming the wonderful example that the current Chief Justice Tom Saylor has demonstrated for everyone in moving our system forward and avoiding even the appearance of impropriety and of being a firm and guiding master of the ship of justice. And now Justice Saylor, who happens to be have been elected as a Republican and retained after a 10-year term on the court, and now more recently has become the Chief Justice, will have a series of allies, whether they are allied with him philosophically on how the laws will be interpreted is yet to be seen, how those coalitions are built on the court. But we do know that all of the newly elected justices share Chief Justice Saylor's commitment to avoiding even the appearance of impropriety on our highest court. And so that is a win for all of Pennsylvania.
Absolutely. So the question then is, what lessons come out of last night's election? Because I think a lot of people understood the historic nature of the election, which is why I think there was a bit of an uptick in turnout that you normally don't see in these kind of elections.
Well, the first takeaway is that the labor movement in Pennsylvania that was hyperactive in this judicial cycle, because its leadership understood and got that this was the first time in over 300 years that there were 3 simultaneous vacancies on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, as well as the 2 vacancies on the Intermediate Appellate Court statewide. The labor movement rolled up its sleeves early on, held its eyes on its leadership, mobilized and motivated its membership in every community in Pennsylvania. And we saw, in relative terms, even in a relatively low turnout election, that working men and women in general, and union members in particularly, engaged, understood, participated, voted, knocked on doors, hung their banners, made their phone calls, did what they needed to do to assure that their sisters and brothers understood what was at stake. And what was at stake is our very existence in Pennsylvania. These courts decide such things as the quality of the air we breathe and the quality of the water we drink. They decide what access our children have to education. They decide what our utility bills are going to be. They decide our eligibility for unemployment insurance and workers' compensation when we lose our jobs or when we're hurt in our effort to try to earn a living. They determine whether or not people who engage in their statutorily protected rights to organize and bargain collectively can be incarcerated for exercising those rights. So they got it and they worked at it, and there we are now with a sweep, a very clean sweep of people who were all highly qualified. My other union, the Pennsylvania Bar Institute, rated the candidates who won as between highly recommended and recommended, and that's unprecedented. By way of comparison, when I ran for the Commonwealth Court in Pennsylvania 14 years ago, I was the only Democratic candidate on the entire slate that was highly recommended by the Pennsylvania Bar Institute. I was the only one, and we have a trifecta here. So it's really very special.
Or on the other side, you had one of the people running who was not recommended at all.
That she was not recommended, and I don't know all of the details, but part of it was an assertion that she had manipulated the rating and review process, and that led to a number of other decisions apparently that the Bar Institute made. And I wasn't in on their deliberations, but it is very rare, but it happens, and it happened this time. And she's a sitting judge on the Commonwealth Court right now, and will remain on the Commonwealth Court after this election cycle now is over. The Bar Institute, in reviewing her record, made its determination that she was to be not recommended, and that's significant. But what was more significant was the universal turnout among particularly working men and women in Pennsylvania, in every corner of Pennsylvania, and the both parallel side. All 3 of the winning candidates got very close to the same vote statewide, and their lead held up in virtually every community in Pennsylvania, and that is a testament to the work that was done on their behalf, particularly by unions throughout Pennsylvania, and that was buttressed by a number of other community activist kinds of organizations working in coalition with the Pennsylvania labor movement to together recognize and deal with this extraordinary opportunity that was met, of course, as well with an extraordinary challenge.
Yeah, and looking at some of the what my thoughts on this, and maybe you'll agree or disagree. I think some of it had to do with obviously the organizing that went into it, unprecedented, and the labor movement did an outstanding job. But part of it also, I think, is the fact that people are looking at the budget process, going, somebody's got to hold in check a General Assembly that's gone way off the rails, and we need a way to maybe rein some of that in, because you look at the gerrymandering that's gone on, and do you think much of that played into the voter turnout?
I don't think that there's any question but that it did. And among the big winners in yesterday's election, although he wasn't on the ballot, is Governor Tom Wolf, who, obviously had some affirmation of exactly the kinds of thoughts that you're suggesting. And we know from being on the street, from talking to people, that there are big numbers of people, Democrats and Republicans, urban and rural and suburban, who are very deeply offended by the configuration of our state Senate and legislative districts and our congressional districts, and find that there is some conundrum for them in recognizing that the districts have been drawn so that politicians decide who gets to vote for them, instead of the voters getting to decide which politicians represent them. And that ultimately gets to be, at least in the state House and the state Senate context, an issue that finds its way every 10 years with input from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, because the Reapportionment Redistricting Commission that is appointed by the General Assembly contains a Democrat and Republican from the House, a Democrat and Republican from the Senate, and the fifth member, the deciding vote, comes from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So people got that, and as we turn the corner in this decade and move towards another decennial, every 10-year census, and the impact that has on requirement of redistricting and reapportionment, people get the idea that that's the case. But of equal import is that we elected a couple of relatively young people to the bench. And as I've indicated on this show in the past, and as you know, I think, and many of our listeners know, I've been talking about this election for the last year and a half, when I first kind of focused on how significant a cycle this was going to be. That judges, unlike other political offices, are elected for a 10-year term, and at the expiration of that 10-year term, jurists who so choose stand for retention. They don't have an opponent. It's a yes/no ballot on retention.
Right.
So with our having elected a few relatively young people to the statewide bench, we have people that will be on the bench for more than a decade if they so choose. And that is also very significant, because we get some continuity, and we get a chance for jurists to grow on the job in security, that they will have time enough on the bench to really understand the process and procedure as well as the law. And that can only inure to the benefit of all people in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, a little bit of stability, it wouldn't hurt. Last line of questioning, though, because, first thing this morning, I'm barraged with emails saying, well, this is why we shouldn't be electing these folks, and we need to have merit selection. And I understand the Pennsylvania House of Representatives has a bill banging around there that they've thrown out for merit selections. Is electing justices the right approach? Is it the best? I'm curious your thoughts.
My thought is that it is a difficult and ugly approach to the selection of who sits on our various levels of courts. That having been said, it reminds me of that well-known and well-worn statement of Winston Churchill, that democracy is a terrible form of government until we compare it to all others. The fact of the matter is that if we were to go to any form of so-called merit selection that at least I have seen over the last 40-odd years, it replaces the voters with some political elite who get to pick and choose who our jurists and judges will be. And that somehow smacks of the idea that some politician who may well be in office because he or she got to participate in drawing the lines of what his or her legislative or Senate district will be, gets to decide who our judges will be and supplant his or her narrowly focused, politically motivated judgment for the will of the people. So as between stripping the people of their right to vote, that most sacred and precious of all of our rights, what I have described in the past as not a fundamental right but a foundational right, stripping the people of that foundational right is to me just simply unacceptable. Working on ways to bring these elections for judicial officers into a heightened awareness by the people, maybe changing them from the odd-numbered years, what is referred to as off-year elections when we know there's no off-year in politics, and putting them in the even-numbered years so that they're coterminous with gubernatorial elections, presidential elections, U.S. Senate elections, congressional elections, state legislative elections. Maybe that would help to increase turnout. That's something to explore. As long as we have the Citizens United decision and its progeny here in Pennsylvania, a case known as General Majority PAC versus Corbett, that allows for unlimited expenditure of funds by certain dark money interest groups, there's going to be a problem. But in the end, I'll take the will and the judgment of the people over the will and the judgment of elected politicians almost any day and every day of the week.
There you go. I just thought I'd give you a chance to riff on that a bit. I appreciate it, Erwin. Great talking with you, man.
Good to talk with you. Thanks for having me on, and I look forward to talking to you next week.
All righty. Our good friend, attorney Erwin Aronson. Quick break. Right back with your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Unusually powerful tropical cyclone heading towards Yemen, of all places.
The first ever hurricane for the nation of Yemen.
Yes, they should.
Hillary supports an investigation of Exxon. Record warm oceans blamed for the collapse of Maine's cod fishery. Plus, TransCanada calls timeout on its controversial Keystone XL pipeline.
For now, all of those timeouts and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
A new study says that by the end of this century, the Persian Gulf might be too hot to support human life. So finally, peace in the Middle East.
Oh, thank Allah. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, big story, I think, as we go to air today. TransCanada says, never mind about that whole Keystone XL pipeline?
Yep. TransCanada, the owner of the controversial proposed Keystone XL pipeline, has requested the U.S. State Department to suspend its application for a cross-border permit. TransCanada says the pipeline route is undergoing a new state review in Nebraska, but environmental groups suggest the move is actually an attempt to prevent President Obama from rejecting it. No application, no rejection.
Of course, if Hillary Clinton wins in 2016, she has already said she would reject it. So they're gambling, they're hoping, they're praying that a Republican wins in 2016, I guess.
That's apparently it. TransCanada did leave open the option of trying again after the 2016 election. And yes, all of the 2016 Republican candidates support the pipeline.
I'm glad they note they are trying to work out something with Nebraska concerning the route, because it gives me the opportunity to mention that the whole reason this thing has been delayed so long in the first place is because Nebraska Republicans rejected the original route for that Keystone XL pipeline.
Another question is whether ongoing eminent domain lawsuits from landowners in Nebraska whose property has been seized for the pipeline will be allowed to go through. Speaking of elections, Election Day 2016 is now 1 year away. The Democratic presidential primary is also now down to 3 candidates. Harvard Law professor Lawrence Lessig, who focused on campaign finance reform as the linchpin to solving major challenges like climate change, dropped out of the race on Monday. Unlike in the Republican Party, all of the Democratic candidates accept climate science and only differ on how to address it. Meanwhile, Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton now says she supports the idea of a Justice Department investigation into oil giant Exxon after new revelations that Exxon deliberately misled the public and funded groups to deny the global scientific consensus on dangerous climate change. Clinton's remarks come 2 weeks after fellow Democratic candidates Senator Bernie Sanders and former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley already announced their support.
And they also come only after she was asked about it. She did not go out of her way to make that statement that she'd like to see Exxon investigated. It was sort of done in a hallway off stage during a campaign event.
In other news, the year 2015 has already smashed the record for the highest number of Category 4 and 5 storms ever recorded. And now, in the Middle East, the nation of Yemen on the Arabian Peninsula is seeing its first ever hurricane on record. According to CNN meteorologist Tom Sater, Cyclone Shapala could dump as much as 8 years of rain in 2 days on the arid nation.
This is going to drop several years worth of rainfall, which is going to cause massive debris flows and flash flooding. This is a big, big deal here. You just don't see this kind of rain in this area. Something unprecedented we haven't seen in this part of the world.
Oh, it's just a coincidence. Nothing to worry about. Climate changing? What are you talking about?
And just want to note for the record, like Hurricane Patricia in the Pacific a few weeks ago, Cyclone Shapala also intensified with similar record speed. Yemen is a nation already suffering a major humanitarian crisis stemming from years of violent conflict, and Cyclone Shapala will not help. In the U.S., the same record warm ocean temperatures are blamed for the collapse of Maine's commercial cod fishing industry. Despite new stringent catch limits, scientists say the rapid warming of ocean waters off the coast of New England has contributed to the collapse of the fishery. Fishery managers say they did not expect the ocean to warm so quickly or disrupt cod numbers so fast, and thus their catch limit quotas allowed too much cod to be taken this year. Finally, good news and bad news in Antarctica. Antarctica is experiencing a net gain of ice for now. According to NASA, snow is accumulating on the middle of the continent at a faster rate than the ice is melting away around its edges. The scientists say the good news is that means Antarctica isn't adding to rising sea levels. But the bad news is that means the current rise in sea levels isn't from Antarctica, which means it's coming from somewhere they haven't accounted for yet.
Outer space?
Probably not.
Damn. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget, you can download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
You're as cold as ice. You're willing to sacrifice our love.
Organizing America 3 hours each night. The Rick Smith Show.
And the radio is in the hands of such a lot of fools trying to anesthetize the way that you feel. Radio is a sound salvation. Radio is cleaning up the nation.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So huge night last night, historic night, big election. And, I thought it'd be interesting to take a second and recognize the folks who were out there knocking on the doors, doing the leafleting, doing the phone calling, all of the volunteers who took time away from their families, time away from their jobs, their hobbies and all that, to do what, many thought not possible, electing 3 Democratic state Supreme Court justices and the whole state slate. That pretty amazing stuff. Here to talk about it, I've asked Rick Bloomingdale, president of the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO. Rick, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, Rick, it's always a pleasure to be on the show, especially after such a great day.
Yeah, huge win. I was watching last night, the polling numbers coming in. They jumped out early to a lead and kept it all night long, and I think that's a testament to the people out there doing the hard work.
Absolutely. We had thousands of volunteers out yesterday all over the state of Pennsylvania, hundreds in Philadelphia, hundreds in Allegheny, dozens in York, Dauphin, Lehigh Valley, northeastern Pennsylvania, we have Erie County. We had workers out everywhere. And, and the issue wasn't whether or not we were going to elect 3 Democrats. It was whether or not we were going to elect 3 pro-worker Supreme Court justices, folks who will give workers a level playing field in front of the courts that decide issues that have a huge impact on all of our lives. So we're really thrilled that David Wecht, Kevin Doherty, and Christine Donahue will be joining the Supreme Court in early January, and Alice Dubois joining the Superior Court, and Michael Wojcik becoming the first Democrat in a long time, first pro-worker person in a long time to be elected to the Commonwealth Court, which is such a huge court for the people of Pennsylvania.
You know, I look at this, and everywhere I looked, I saw your RV out there. I saw working people, just knocking on doors, talking to friends and neighbors. And I started thinking about some of the attacks that we're seeing by the Republican legislature here in Pennsylvania. One of them being that anti-stalking thing, not wanting people talking to their neighbors. And I kind of thought about, that piece of legislation in looking at what just passed.
Yeah, absolutely. And, who knows what the impact of that is going to be. And, whether the governor signs it or not, we'll see. But we certainly now have a court that will give us a fair hearing, won't be stacked against us if it's decided that we should pursue, if it's abused, right? If folks can start to harass people who are engaged in their constitutionally protected right to organize or free speech or walk a picket line and peacefully. We'll see if this law has any real impact, or if we're going to have to appeal it into the courts. And of course, now we've got some people who will hopefully give us a level playing field.
There you go. And looking at last night's results, though, do you see this as a shift in Pennsylvania, or is this, because my first thought was, maybe this is some blowback for the General Assembly here holding our budget hostage?
Well, certainly some of that, we had good turnout in Philadelphia. We had turnout in places where, and we won in places where we never expected to win. Christine Donahue, Kevin Doherty, they all led in different counties that traditionally Democrats don't do well. So I think it was a shot at folks want this legislature to quit playing partisan right-wing games and solve the budget problem, work with Governor Wolf to get a budget that's going to benefit all of Pennsylvanians.
Now, we saw in Ohio that they passed issue 1 out there saying, that they want to end the gerrymandering. And I think that was part of this whole case. Everybody that I came in contact with understood the Supreme Court's role here in Pennsylvania at kind of leveling that playing field and maybe not coming up with the cartoonish districts that we have today.
That's right. And in Pennsylvania, we have a much more, the Supreme Court has a much bigger role than it does in maybe other states. I don't know all 50 states, so I can only speak to PA. But here, we do have, in Ohio just passed where they're going to have a more nonpartisan commission they're trying to set up. And here we've always had a partisan commission, 2 Ds, 2 Rs, and a Republican. And the Supreme Court is always it picks the chair if the 4 can't agree. So, and they've always tried to pick someone who's nonpartisan, fair, looks to create districts that are fair, and that went horribly wrong in 2010, where you had a blatantly political process. A Republican Supreme Court picked a Republican chairman of the commission, so the maps were drawn in a way that certainly has not benefited Pennsylvania in these continuing fights to try to get a budget. So, yeah, our Supreme Court has a big role. We're excited. Like I said, these folks, they're good for every one of them. Has a working class background, has done great things and been fair to workers. Kevin Doherty, with what he's done to help our veterans, has been just nothing short of amazing. Christine Donahue and David Wecht, their service on the Superior Court, their fairness to the average citizen, giving people a chance to their day in court, as it were, on issues that affect the Superior Court, to have them move on to the Supreme Court. We couldn't find 3 better jurists who are going to become justices of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And I'm so proud that, to have been part of that effort, and our whole team that did an amazing job. The whole labor movement just came together and said, we've got to put people on the bench. who care about workers and workers' issues, and they mobilized, unlike anything we've ever seen in a judicial race, and it was a fairly incredible mobilization. So it was a pretty remarkable outcome.
So now this is the beginning, I assume, of what you'll continue on into next year, which obviously the presidential year. This is kind of the warm up, if you will, but and a pretty good warm up at that.
That's true, but we can't forget that look, president's great, U.S. Senate's great, but these attacks on workers are not coming from those. They are from the U.S. Senate, but the big attacks on workers are coming from the state House and state Senate. And we have all 203 state House members up next year, half of the state Senate. And the one kind of blemish on last night's victory was in Western PA, where we had a Democratic senator resigned and left a vacancy, and there was a special election yesterday. And unfortunately, the Republicans outspent the Democrat probably 2 to 3 to 1, and they won by a slight margin. So we're getting, now that was a special. So next year we'll have a chance to take that Senate seat back. But for the time being, we've got somebody who's going to be sworn in, who has clearly said that he's going to take on labor unions. So we went backwards in the state Senate, but we went way ahead in the state in the U.S. our state Supreme Court, where we have 3 excellent jurists, as well as Commonwealth and Superior Court. So all in all, it was a great night, and we look forward to continuing to build our organization, continuing to get ready for next year's battles. We're going to be electing people, Republicans or Democrats. I've always said, I don't care what party you are, as long as you're for workers, we're going to be for you. And we're going to vet candidates. We're going to look for candidates who are going to be for workers, and we're going to run them against people who are not anti-worker candidates or representatives, whether that's a Republican primary, a Democratic primary, general. Next year, we're gonna try to get out there and to get more pro-worker candidates in both parties.
Maybe get some of those great people who are out knocking on doors and leafleting and
Absolutely.
making phone calls to throw their hat into the ring and get some actual working people back into our General Assembly.
That would be a great change of pace.
Great stuff. Rick, I appreciate you taking time for us. Congratulations on the big win and you guys and the great mobilizing effort. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rick. It's always a pleasure.
Great talking to Rick Bloomingdale, president of the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We gotta get organized. We gotta do it today. No more mindless confusion. No more disarray. We gotta get organized.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Poor old Jeb seems to have a terminal case of Mitt Romney disease. He just keeps blurting out asinine comments that reveal the fact that he is, in heart, soul, and political mindset, yet another son of a Bush. His inner bigotry against the poor, coupled with his cartoonish concept of the black community's political motivation, was outed recently when he was asked how he planned to win the votes of African Americans. Our message is one of hope and aspiration, he responded. Okay, Jeb, go positive. So far, so good. But then the deep prejudice derived from his narrow upbringing as a child of privilege surfaced. My campaign message is not one of division and get in line and we'll take care of you with free stuff, he asserted with a sneer. Then to punctuate his little lecture on how to appeal to low-income black families, the multimillionaire heir to the Bush fortune said he would tell them, you can achieve earned success. Yes, Jeb, instead of hard-hit people who've been downsized or left jobless lining up to get what you call free stuff, like unemployment compensation and health care, better to challenge them to earn success. Tell them to have the gumption, as you did, to be born to rich parents, to be welcomed as legacy applicants into the most prestigious schools, and to have their fathers open the doors for them to achieve financial and political success. This is Jim Hightower saying, yet the former shoo-in for the GOP presidential nomination can't figure out why he's running third in New Hampshire and fifth in Iowa, even after he poured millions into a month-long blitz of TV ads to goose up his appeal. Such shallowness, callousness, and condescension exposes an ingrained contempt for all who don't live in Bush's elite zip code. No one but his fellow one percenters want a clueless guy like that in the White House.
To get more of Jim Hightower's populist take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to, visit www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
So have you seen the hashtag? And I gotta love the hashtag. The Jeb can fix it hashtag. Have you seen this? Jeb can fix it. Anybody like me thinking 2000 election? I mean, and anyone like me going, if you're running on, trust me, I can fix my campaign. You've probably already lost. I mean, you look at the latest poll that's out. Not so good. Not so good in the last debate. And the polling numbers, well, kind of pathetic at this point. Has Jeb getting thumped by Hillary Clinton in the last poll, 47-43. Marco Rubio does better, but still not as bad as Donald Trump against Hillary in the latest bit of polling. Oddly enough, and this is the weird thing for me, Ben Carson, even with Hillary. And I got to be honest, I think Carson's probably the least politically astute and probably the last of those folks there that I would want to be president. I look at him and I go, really just not a lot there. Maybe an amazing surgeon and maybe a really brilliant guy, doesn't give me that leadership feeling that I think that you'd like to have. Kind of a follower. And I love how Donald Trump kind of pulled him into, we called Ben and said, come on, Ben, come with us and we'll renegotiate these debates. And you got Ben there, nodded and said, yep, that's me. Which is now kind of led to this next bit of insanity that the Republicans are, and I love this. The framing around it is fantastic because what has happened is you've got the Republican candidates who are now acting like a union. They've all come together collectively and they want to negotiate. They want to bargain. They want to sit down and talk about they want to talk about the debates, and they have a list of demands. And I love the list of demands. You can't make this up. This is what they're saying. To anyone who hosts a debate, you will commit that you will not ask the candidates to raise their hand to ask a question. That you will not ask yes or no questions without time to provide a substantive answer. You will not allow candidate-to-candidate questioning, will not allow props and pledges by the candidates, will not have reaction shots of members of the audience. We can't show the people in the crowd. No. Will not show an empty podium after a break and describe how far away the bathrooms are. I kind of think that was not too bad. You will not use behind shots of the candidates showing their notes because, we're supposed to believe that everything's between their ears. And I think that one shows just maybe how dumb we are, not them. You will not leave microphones on during breaks. I think that's reasonable. You will not allow members of the audience to wear political messages, shirts, buttons, signs, and all of that stuff. You will not, what instructions you will provide to the audience about cheering during the debate. You will not, what are your plans for headshots? You will not do all of these things that they kept in place. And my favorite, you will pledge that the hall will be kept below 67 degrees at all times because we don't want anyone to look like they're sweating. That would be bad. And I got to be honest, I think it's kind of funny that they are setting the terms instead of saying, here's the reality, everyone should be held to the same set of rules. I just find it kind of interesting that it's really turned into just a game now. It's political theater. They want to dictate camera angles. They want to dictate, who gets shown and when and how. It's kind of, I guess it's kind of pulling back the curtain, isn't it? And is that a good thing? So that's kind of the question. Is that really a good thing? Is it something we should be doing? Well, we will see. Anyway, if you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Frank M. Spec, labor news. Right back. Stick around. You listen to the Rick Smith Show. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The labor movement's drive to raise the wage for workers is especially critical for working women, especially women of color. Women fill the ranks of low-wage workers even as they are paid less across the board than men. AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Liz Schuler recently spoke to the National Women's Law Center about working women's need for a voice on the job. She said asserting that voice will raise the wage for millions of women while improving working conditions for working people, but only if workers unite in solidarity and demand it.
We need to join together and speak out for good wages, great benefits, fair scheduling, and equal pay at work. We need to demand paid sick leave, paid family leave, and quality child care. And these things are accessible and are available to us if we stick together. We need to make our voices heard because the status quo is not working. A typical woman who works full-time loses more than $500,000 over her lifetime because we are paid less than men. $500,000. That's staggering. Women are the majority in low-wage jobs. Women have a greater responsibility at home, but if we don't have the benefit of a union, we're unlikely to have earned sick leave or paid family leave.
Schuler says the labor movement has historically been too slow to address the racial economic disparity being experienced by women of color.
Women of color experience lower median weekly earnings, higher rates of poverty, and greater unemployment. While women overall make 79 cents on the dollar, I think it just went up, Black women and Hispanic women only make 63 cents and 54 cents respectively. Yet the women's movement and, let's face it, the labor movement have been slow to address these issues. Feminists, we've got to stand up for all working women.
The Chicago Teachers Union is encouraging its members to save money to weather a possible strike. Thousands of teachers in Chicago are facing layoffs starting as early as January. The union says Mayor Rahm Emanuel's hand-picked school's CEO has plans to lay off 5,000 teachers and claims that the layoffs could start in January. The Chicago Teachers Union says mass layoffs only exacerbate the current 50% teacher turnover rate. On Thursday, the union will hold an official practice strike vote in all Chicago public schools. A teachers' union rally is set for November 23rd in Grant Park. Labor contract talks are in mediation as negotiations on a new contract continue.
Workers Independent News is heard daily on The Rick Smith Show, live 3 to 6 p.m. coast to coast at thericksmithshow.com. The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
WIN is made possible in part through underwriting support from the United Steelworkers. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thoughts are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
Working hard to make a left, red shed a bomb red. Father, son, left to carry on, blue denim in his vein. Oh, he's a working class man.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick at thericksmithshow.com. As we were doing our Southern tour back in August, where we traveled throughout the Southern United States talking about labor's involvement in the civil rights movement, one of the places we stopped, Savannah, Georgia. to talk about misclassification of truck drivers in the ports of Savannah there. And we had some really just amazing stories. And you look at the organizing that's going on around the country over misclassification. I think it's an enormously huge, to use a Donald Trump frame, enormously, hugely, amazingly big kind of issue to talk about, which is why we've asked our good friend Frank M. Specht, executive producer over at Workers Independent News Service, to come talk with us. Frank, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, it's great to be there, and I gather we're all having good weather.
It's beautiful here. It's one of these days where I go, you know what? Could be nice for a sick day.
Yeah, well, I hope you have them. At the rate we're going in this country, they're going to abolish sick days. Unfortunately, they're not going to abolish illness, but we'll see,
Well, it comes back to, your guy there, you're being out in Wisconsin. You got Paul Ryan, now Speaker of the House. No family leave for you, but for me, great.
Well, we have quite a crew out here. There's no question about it. And I think that what we see in Wisconsin is partially what's happening in another way. We were talking about misclassification of workers and also worker rights. Well, here, of course, the major objective of the Republican Party was to abolish worker rights insofar as they relate to collective bargaining. So you can have a union, but they passed a state law saying couldn't do very much. I think that what we see going on elsewhere is full-scale attack on the public sector, and part of that are court cases winning their way through, saying that in the public sector, unions cannot have like a union shop that has to be all right to work, and of course that's to undermine the union. On the other hand, there's this huge, I think, growing movement that really that's challenging the legal system. And let me be clear: employees, people think they go to work, and they're employed by the employer that's actually standing there. Well, it turns out that's not quite the case. There are two types of things going on. One is the actual misclassification. In other words, you go to work and somebody says, well, yeah, it's true that we expect you here all the time, and here's your uniform, and incidentally, here's your schedule, but you're a contractor. You're responsible for this, 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 and this, and we're not responsible for anything. You say, but if I wear a different shirt, I can be fired. They say, well, yes, but you're a contractor and you have complete freedom. So for many, many years, the courts have bought this argument. But because people are in motion, just like the courts bought segregation, now people are beginning to question it. And the courts are saying, well, wait a minute, maybe we should take a look at this. Maybe you're really misclassified and really should be an employee with Social Security and unemployment compensation and workers' compensation, things like that.
Yeah. Well, that's what we found down in Savannah, Frank. We talked to all of these drivers who were told, what time they had to be there, what equipment they had to take, what they had to pick up. All of their daily working conditions were controlled by someone who was technically their boss, but not really in the eyes of the law. And they were the ones held, making payments on the vehicle, paying for fuel, paying for tolls, paying their taxes, doing all of this stuff where they had just shifted the responsibility and the risk onto the backs of the workers, and the company just cashed in.
Well, that's a tremendous move if this happens, because then it's possible to really negotiate, because you have lots of people. And so it's possibly to, as we say, collectively bargain, which means a bunch of people. Okay, so that's one thing that's really important, the misclassification issue as contractors. Okay, the other issue is a similar one, is the franchisees. I go to my McDonald's restaurant or my Burger King or whatever, and the same story. I'm told what to do. The restaurant owner allegedly is told what to make, and they cannot vary from the formula. If they vary from the formula, they lose their ability to use the word, say, McDonald's. But in theory, they have nothing to do with the McDonald's Corporation, and the employee is told, well, you just work for this little franchise. It has nothing to do with McDonald's. And so that if you want to negotiate a union, you can try, but restaurant by restaurant, you'll be at this until, the cows come home. Well, recently, another court ruling said, well, let's take a look at this seriously. These franchisees are not really independent. In fact, there is a shared burden with the McDonald's Corporation in this case, and that in fact, McDonald's is basically setting the overall parameters for these franchisees. So maybe McDonald's should own up to this, and everybody should just be honest with each other. And if the union comes along, we can negotiate with McDonald's for all the franchisees. And then again, that's a huge thing. And we went through this in the 1930s in this country when the companies said, well, yeah, maybe we can agree to a union in this plant, but it has nothing to do with anything else, and refused to negotiate nationally. Once unions were able to achieve national bargaining, and they did so as a result of direct action, then you saw the standard of living of working people really go up because you could negotiate nationwide standards so people could get paid decently.
Then and the employer couldn't run away. I mean, I look at Boeing, what they're trying to do by moving to South Carolina and running away from the union there. You got the union going there, say we're going to negotiate and try and set that same kind of standard that you're talking about.
That's right. But in the fast food industry, where are you going to go? You have to have your restaurant. You can't. It doesn't help you to move your restaurant to Ecuador.
Right.
So you have, in a certain sense, if through direct action and mobilizations in each community, as is going on, will happen on November 10th, you can force national standards here. This is a huge upward hit for all the workers involved. It'd be a big deal. It would change the nature of the fast food industry, I think, in this country for the better, and it would allow people working in it to have a kind of decent wage. The fact of the matter is, McDonald's and the rest of the companies are making money in Denmark and France and Sweden and whatnot, where workers are paid about double what they're being paid here, and they have all kinds of benefits. So if they've learned how to make money there, it seems to me they can learn how to make money in Indiana.
Yeah, I'm with you. But here, what do you say to the person, Frank, who says, well, you know, they're all the fast food industry workers here in this country, they make those wages, but they just get it through handouts from the government?
Well, they make the wages. What you've got here, what I say is, do you really think it's a good idea for the government to have to help pay the wages for McDonald's?
I absolutely do not. But, you know,
and that's what I say. I mean, when people ask me, I say, well, what's happening here is that McDonald's is paying so little that you are paying the wages. You want to continue that? Fine, but I would rather keep the money for myself and not give it to McDonald's.
And the other part of this, Frank,
that.
the other part of this is, you know, it's not just McDonald's. It's just not the low-waged economy. I mean, I look at a company like FedEx that, you know, basically built their model on the use of misclassified, or I should say independent contractors.
That's right. And it's being challenged across the board. But you know what will really challenge it? I think it's the same thing that challenged it many years ago. When you used to go to work for many companies, you had to sign something called, we called it a yellow dog contract, which said, I won't join a union. It's a condition of employment. I will not join the union. And so that was, people signed those and because they wanted to go to work. They had to go to work, right? So what happened after a while is that people got together and refused and said, we're not going to do this anymore. And there were collective action of one kind of another, and the law changed. And I think in this country, what we see, and have seen at least in labor law, or the laws governing working people, is, and that includes incidentally slavery, in 1860, when people got together and said, no, we're not going to do this. We're through with this kind of business. We're not going to have our standard of living go down. Then somehow or other, the courts and the laws changed. And I think that's where we're going to be here again.
Yeah, well, I think that's where we're at the beginning of, because as you pointed out on November 10th, you're seeing that organizing, that push of low-wage workers saying, you know, enough is enough. And predictably, I think anyone who was an observer of history and looked at the 2008 crash and all of the years afterward where we're told we got to tighten our belt and suck it up because things will get better. I think people are now saying, you know what, they haven't been getting better all these years. It's about time, and we need to do it now.
Well, there's also everybody else. Let's say we talk about fast food, but we can talk about the auto parts industry. We can talk about all of these geniuses who are making big money because they say we're better organized, we're on to high technology. The thing that distinguishes the United States is low wages. And, anybody can make money if you don't pay people.
Right.
It's another story to actually learn how to apply these technologies effectively and to actually organize effectively, and so that your productivity goes up. And, of course, wages can go up without causing inflation. In fact, the fact of the matter is, when we really get down to it, you could double the wages in the fast food industry or go up to $15 an hour as a minimum, and they're probably have almost zero effect on the profitability of these companies because they're so profitable.
No, I mean, you look at the billions of dollars they're taking in and that we, the taxpayers, are subsidizing. I look at it as massive redistribution of wealth from we, the taxpayers, up to these big corporate special interests and their investors.
Yeah, it's Robin Hood in reverse, as they say. Well, here's the other thing that's sort of distressing, I think, is that we're into the presidential election season, really, about a year ahead of time. And I would like to see the candidates be a little bit more forthcoming. Bernie has been clear. Hillary is not as clear. But to really issue this clarion call and say paying people less than what it costs to live is a moral stain on our society, and I won't stand for it.
I'm with you, but Frank,
like that.
The invisible hand. Don't you know about the invisible hand? We don't need government getting involved.
Yeah, it's taking my money out of my pocket all the time. But it's the clarion call for a change and a vision that I think that people are looking for. Some are finding it in Trump, but others are finding it elsewhere. But in order to move forward in this country, what's happened is when you have a visionary who says, here's what we're going to do, here's what we're for, not what we're against, but here's what we're for, and here's how we're going to do it, the country has moved. And I think that Martin Luther King was that kind of visionary. The country moved. He had a vision. It was clear. It sounded good, seemed reasonable to many, many people, and fair and honest and moral. And that is what seems to be missing from the political process.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I mean, one of the things that I had hoped for President Obama when he took office back in 2009 was that he helped to return the reward to work. That if that what we're told as kids, if you work hard, you play by the rules, you're going to get ahead. Sadly, that's not the case anymore. And for me, that was my great hope for him, is that he would return that reward to work.
Well, it would have been nice, but for whatever reasons, he wasn't there the way many, many people hope. But he got elected because I think he did have a vision. I think for Hillary to win, she's going to have to really be able to communicate that vision. When somebody gets up and says, as Trump did the other day, well, we should get out of the Middle East, basically, and let them kill each other over there and put $17 billion into infrastructure, well, that makes sense. All right? That is what has to happen. We need to put much, much more than that into the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And but that's clear. And I think that his other policies, in terms of immigration and xenophobia, all these terrible things. But in terms of something like that, it seems to me the left has to get up and have a vision of what we want this country to look like.
Yeah. So let me ask you last.
And part of that is the money part. You got to be able to earn enough money to live.
Right. No, I'm with you, and that's hopefully what November 10th will begin pushing, and the next step towards getting to where we all think and we all know we need to go. So, last question. Out of this November 10th, what do you see going forward after this big event, this big day? What do you see?
Well, I think if it's well attended, you're going to see two things. You're going to see an increasingly nervous pushback by conservatives and by the fast food industry, among others. But I think you'll see a tremendous upsurge as we get to the end of the month, when it's key shopping days, and it may be time for people who want to say something in the retail industry to be a good time to begin to do something. We know already that the companies have backed off on some of their early openings on the day after Thanksgiving. Others have now decided to stay closed on Thanksgiving. Many of them have made concessions on scheduling because they see that people are ready to move. And I hope that continues and grows, particularly on Black Friday or, at that time of the year when the firms are particularly concerned about sales and image.
And it'll be something interesting to watch, and I'm sure you'll be back to tell us how to report about what's going on, as you do every day with Workers Independent News, and I appreciate the work you guys do. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for your history thing.
Yep.
We hope to be able to do more with that, and I'll let you know offline shortly.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Frank.
Okie doke. Take it easy. Bye.
Have a great night. Frank Emspeck, Workers Independent News, laborradio.org, the website. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people. Come to talk.
Work at night. I got no time for living, yes. I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Got milk? If you lived in Neillsville, Wisconsin, the answer might have been no. And on this day in labor history, the year was 1933. Wisconsin was known as the dairy state. In the 1930s, it was the largest producer of milk in the country. The price of milk fell during the Great Depression, and farmers received a smaller percentage of the proceeds. A cooperative group of dairy farmers objected to the low prices set by the larger dairy plants. Farmers who produced milk for bottling remained solvent. However, farmers who produced milk for cheese, butter, and other dairy products were driven into poverty. Some dairy farmers banded together and decided not to sell milk unless a previously agreed upon price was met. They were vastly outnumbered, as many farmers sold at the reduced price. The strikers resorted to roadblocks to prevent delivery to the manufacturers. If a truck driver refused to turn back, the strikers forcibly dumped the milk at the roadside. Sometimes the strikers tainted the delivered milk with kerosene or oil. They also targeted creameries, causing damage to 7 during the strike. The state tried to break up the roadblocks or use convoys to escort trucks. Non-striking farmers attempted to deliver milk via railways, but some rail lines were also blocked by strikers. The October to November strike was the third in a series of milk strikes in Wisconsin. Thousands of gallons of milk were dumped. A 60-year-old farmer was killed at a picket line in one Wisconsin town. In all, farmers lost $10 million during the strike.
No milk today, it seems a common sight, but people passing by don't know the reason why. How could they know just what this message means? The end of my hopes, the end of all my dreams.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Behind the door, where my love brings.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been talking about everyone's need for good transportation systems and how America has built theirs in big leaps and bounds. I've mentioned that I would only need 2 books to do a good job teaching a class on American democracy. The one I mentioned earlier is I-69 by Matt Dillinger. The other, Nothing Like It in the World, The Men Who Built the Transcontinental Railroad, written by Stephen Ambrose, is a detailed account of the vast project of building a railroad in the 1860s that spanned the North American continent. Though the politics of each of these 2 projects are much alike, and both are instructive about American democracy, it's the Transcontinental Railroad that I want to focus on for the remainder of this story. The idea of building a railroad that connected the Atlantic with the Pacific was first published in 1832. Join us again for 37 years from start to finish. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13. The American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happy!
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. You know, Frank Emsbeck brought up yellow dog contract, something you don't hear an awful lot about these days. Basically outlawed back in 1932 by the Norris LaGuardia Act. And interesting, I go back to that, and you think about LaGuardia, who was a Republican, as was George Norris, the Republican from Nebraska, obviously Representative LaGuardia from New York because of the airport. But both Republicans going, you know what, we need to get employers off the backs of their workers. In fact, what was going on at the time, a little bit of background, is employers were going to the court system anytime someone would strike and issuing an injunction against striking. And what this act did was gave workers the ability to strike without the judges stepping in, issuing injunctions, and then arresting everybody. It also outlawed the use of yellow dog contracts, which is, if you want to get a job, the job right on the application, will you sign the contract saying you will never, ever, 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 ever join a union? And in order for you to get that job, you had to check yes. And then you were held accountable for that by the courts, because it then became a legally binding contract, much like we do today with a lot of things that we just have kind of closed our eyes to. One of the things that has kind of popped up recently is the use of arbitration court systems, where we no longer have access to publicly held courts. When you sign cell phone contracts, you sign credit card contracts, you sign contracts with stores where you rent furniture, or you name the list. And I think I talked about this about a year or two ago, where I had wanted to go to a doctor to have something done, and I forget what it was at the time. But in order for the doctor to even look at, I was getting a hip injection. For even him to even look at me, I had to sign this agreement that if he boogered me up, if by some reason, something went wrong, and it was, medical malpractice or whatever, that I wouldn't sue in our court system. I would go to an arbitrator, and it laid out the arbitration rules, which basically said that the insurance companies would decide, and all of this stuff would be completely out of my hands. And he said, look, everyone's doing it. And I said, not me, I'm leaving. And he got visibly angry, saying, it's for your own protection. I'm going, no, it's not. No, it's not. But this is another one of these things that you look at our history and you look at where we are today, and there's a lot of similarities, a lot of parallels between where we've come from and where we're heading. That old saying of history repeating itself. Well, we are repeating this stuff over and over and over again, because now it's, you want a job, you got to be an independent contractor. It's not even will you join a union. Now you're legally barred from joining a union. So if you're an independent contractor, sorry, you're on your own, buddy. Because if you have the audacity as an independent contractor to come together and say, we'd like to bargain over wages, hours, conditions, that's an antitrust violation. That gets you thrown in jail. The well-to-do really got this stuff figured out. And if you want the job, if you want to feed your family, you want to keep a roof over the head, you got to do these things. And look, I used to say, if you're going to make a bad deal for yourself, go on. What's the matter to me? The reality is industries are going this way. So you got a handful of people who start making these bad decisions because, hey, I'm going to make my own deal. And they make really bad deals. Then it just snowballs to where now you don't have a choice. And that's, I look at the trucking industry where I spent 20 years. It started off, when I started there, 85% of the LTL market was unionized. Good, solid, family-sustaining wages, healthcare, pensions, all of that stuff. Back in the late 80s, I was making $15 an hour. They don't make $15 an hour doing that job today, more than a quarter century later. And I had healthcare and pension. No healthcare pension today. This is what's happened when they've been allowed to destroy and separate and divide and pit workers against one another. And this just a little bit of our history, but it's going on today, just under a different guise, just under a different name. Kind of makes you wonder, when do we wake up? When do the eyes go, oh, I get it. When do we have the epiphany? Maybe November 10th. Maybe that's the beginning of a larger movement, because we're going to see fast food workers across the country having rallies and protests all over to highlight the fact that you're seeing a massive redistribution of wealth from we, the taxpayers, to these huge corporations in the way of subsidies to their employees, because they're not paying the wages to keep them fed. So we kind of dull the edges of the knife, saying, okay, we'll give you food stamps and housing assistance and heating assistance and school lunch programs and chip for your kids and all of these things to help folks live something of an existence while they're working 40 hours a week. They're playing hard. They're working hard by the rules, and they're not getting ahead. And then we got our Republican friends who point to them and demonize them, saying, oh, they're the 47% who don't pay federal taxes. When the reality is those folks would love to pay federal taxes because it means that they'd be making more money and more money to put on food on the table and a roof on their head and clothes on their kids' backs. That's the reality. And until we wake up and have that moment as a society again, like our grandparents' generation had, I don't see things changing. Hopefully November 10th, the beginning of it, and we'll be covering that right here at the program. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Everybody want to know why I sing the blues. Yes, I say everybody want to know why I sing the blues. Well, I've been around a long time. I really have paid my dues.
Unusually powerful tropical cyclone heading towards Yemen, of all places.
The first ever hurricane for the nation of Yemen.
Yes, they should.
Hillary supports an investigation of Exxon. Record warm oceans blamed for the collapse of Maine's cod fishery. Plus, TransCanada calls timeout on its controversial Keystone XL pipeline.
For now, all of those timeouts and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
A new study says that by the end of this century, the Persian Gulf might be too hot to support human life. So finally, peace in the Middle East.
Oh, thank Allah. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, big story, I think, as we go to air today. TransCanada says, never mind about that whole Keystone XL pipeline?
Yep. TransCanada, the owner of the controversial proposed Keystone XL pipeline, has requested the U.S. State Department to suspend its application for a cross-border permit. TransCanada says the pipeline route is undergoing a new state review in Nebraska. But environmental groups suggest the move is actually an attempt to prevent President Obama from rejecting it. No application, no rejection.
Of course, if Hillary Clinton wins in 2016, she has already said she would reject it. So they're gambling, they're hoping, they're praying that a Republican wins in 2016, I guess.
That's apparently it. TransCanada did leave open the option of trying again after the 2016 election. And yes, all of the 2016 Republican candidates support the pipeline.
I'm glad they note they are trying to work out something with Nebraska concerning the route, because it gives me the opportunity to mention that the whole reason this thing has been delayed so long in the first place is because Nebraska Republicans rejected the original route for that Keystone XL pipeline.
Another question is whether ongoing eminent domain lawsuits from landowners in Nebraska whose property has been seized for the pipeline will be allowed to go through. Speaking of elections, Election Day 2016 is now 1 year away. The Democratic presidential primary is also now down to 3 candidates. Harvard Law professor Lawrence Lessig, who focused on campaign finance reform as the linchpin to solving major challenges like climate change, dropped out of the race on Monday. Unlike in the Republican Party, all of the Democratic candidates accept climate science and only differ on how to address it. Meanwhile, Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton now says she supports the idea of a Justice Department investigation into oil giant Exxon after new revelations that Exxon deliberately misled the public and funded groups to deny the global scientific consensus on dangerous climate change. Clinton's remarks come 2 weeks after fellow Democratic candidates Senator Bernie Sanders and former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley already announced their support.
And they also come only after she was asked about it. She did not go out of her way to make that statement that she'd like to see Exxon investigated. It was sort of done in a hallway off stage during a campaign event.
In other news, the year 2015 has already smashed the record for the highest number of Category 4 and 5 storms ever recorded. And now, in the Middle East, the nation of Yemen on the Arabian Peninsula is seeing its first ever hurricane on record. According to CNN meteorologist Tom Sater, Cyclone Shapala could dump as much as 8 years of rain in 2 days on the arid nation.
This is going to drop several years worth of rainfall, which is going to cause massive debris flows and flash flooding. This is a big, big deal here. You just don't see this kind of rain in this area. Something unprecedented we haven't seen in this part of the world.
Oh, it's just a coincidence. Nothing to worry about. Climate changing? What are you talking about?
And just want to note for the record, like Hurricane Patricia in the Pacific a few weeks ago, Cyclone Shapala also intensified with similar record speed. Yemen is a nation already suffering a major humanitarian crisis stemming from years of violent conflict, and Cyclone Shapala will not help. In the U.S., the same record warm ocean temperatures are blamed for the collapse of Maine's commercial cod fishing industry. Despite new stringent catch limits, scientists say the rapid warming of ocean waters off the coast of New England has contributed to the collapse of the fishery. Fishery managers say they did not expect the ocean to warm so quickly or disrupt cod numbers so fast, and thus their catch limit quotas allowed too much cod to be taken this year. Finally, good news and bad news in Antarctica. Antarctica is experiencing a net gain of ice for now. According to NASA, snow is accumulating on the middle of the continent at a faster rate than the ice is melting away around its edges. The scientists say the good news is that means Antarctica isn't adding to rising sea levels. But the bad news is that means the current rise in sea levels isn't from Antarctica, which means it's coming from somewhere they haven't accounted for yet.
Outer space?
Probably not.
Damn. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget, you can download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
You're as cold as ice. You're willing to sacrifice our love. Now the lessons of the past were all learned with workers' blood. The mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities to the farmlands and trenches full of mud. 'Cause war has always been the boss's way, sir. Come on! The union forever, defending our rights. Let's fight the right wing.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So this week, November 1st through the 7th, is National Apprenticeship Week, where we look at all of the apprenticeship programs that unions put out that taxpayers don't pay for, all done through, well, the union's responsibility to their members and to their crafts, which I think this is a fantastic thing that our president has done with this National Apprenticeship Week. As he points out, the support and encourage apprenticeship programs that will help rebuild our middle class and rededicate ourselves to educating more of our people, retraining our workforce, and renewing our nation's promise to put the American dream within reach. Now, that's what the president's done. What have our friends on the other side of the aisle done? Well, I look at Republican Representative Steve King of Iowa, who has proposed an amendment to the most recent highway bill that would strip away the prevailing wage protections that make sure that these jobs are good paying jobs, that we don't have low road employment, transient labor, and all that stuff. And I guess it shows you the difference on either side of the aisle. But here to talk a little bit about the National Apprenticeship Appreciation Week, I've asked Will Fisher to come talk with us. Will is the head guy over at the Union Veterans Council. You can check out their website at unionveterans.org. Will, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thank you so much for having us on today, Rick.
So I look at this week as really an opportunity to highlight what unions do for their membership and also for society as well.
Absolutely, and for veterans, I'll tell you right now, you'd be hard pressed walking into any joint apprenticeship training center in any state in this country tonight, tomorrow night, or next week and find a room that doesn't have a veteran in it. The building construction trade unions who, run these apprenticeship programs do tremendous work in doing outreach to the veteran community because to get these folks lined up with good careers, whether you're talking about the North America's Building Trade Union's Helmets to Hard Hats program, which has helped place over 20,000 veterans into apprenticeship programs over the last 10 years, all the way down to some of the programs that individual affiliates of ours have, like the UA has the Plumbers, Veterans and Pipe Trades program, where they're actually operating on military installations. And when the last sort of 4 to 6 weeks that those folks are in the service, but transitioning out, their job in the military actually becomes to do some pre-apprenticeship training. And then the day they get out of service, the day they go off active duty, they're rolling directly into an apprenticeship program. It's going to allow them to earn while they learn. It's the other 4-year degree, and it's going to enable them to, have a good career with a skilled trade that they can take and use anywhere in the country.
Yeah, I hear you say that. They'll earn while they learn thing. It sounds so 1950-ish that you would take someone in and train them to do a job and then pay them for it, instead of what the 21st century has brought us is go into huge amount of debt in the hopes that maybe you get a job. Seems kind of the other way, and I got to be honest, a much better way.
Absolutely, and you look at what Congressman Steve King is trying to do. He's categorically, if you want to undermine Davis-Bacon laws, or you want to strip prevailing wage, you are categorically taking food off the plates of veterans. And you cannot stand up on a stage in Iowa and talk about how you support the troops. You can't send an email out to your donors, talk about how you want to honor their sacrifice on Veterans Day, and then work and try to pass legislation that categorically attacks veterans, takes money from their pockets, and takes food off their plates at home.
I'm with you. But, the sad reality is there seems to be a disconnect there. Well, when you talk to the average voter here in Pennsylvania, we've got our Republican friends here who are trying to do the same thing with the state's prevailing wage law, because they've tried to convince people to believe that if we just steal wages away from people, we can save up to 30% on building and construction projects, which is ludicrous, but that's what they keep throwing out there.
They're going to save money by taking wages away from people that will then allow them to pay less taxes because they'll be earning less, spend less money, therefore not generating their local economies. And if you're driving down wages and doing away with prevailing wage and doing away with building things with union labor, you're also going to be building things, with fly-by-night contractors that are going to build a subpar product and a less safe product. Now, what's the added value there? No,
you're right. And the other part of it is you get transient labor coming through from who knows where. And when they leave, they don't care what they leave behind.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Rick. But I'll tell you, these attacks, on workers and these attacks on veterans, and it can never be lost sight of the fact that they're one and the same. That when somebody attacks workers, they're attacking veterans, because the working class and the veteran class are one and the same. I don't know, every unit, not every unit's the same, but, I didn't serve in Iraq with anybody who came home and went to work at Lehman Brothers. The people I served in Iraq with came home and are by and large wage earners. They come from the working class and they're part of the working class. And whether it's undermining Davis-Bacon laws, or trying to pass bad trade deals that strip jobs away from veterans, or voting to defund the VA only so you can hopefully get to, allow your billionaire class friends to privatize the VA and profit off the care of veterans, the working class and the veteran class are under attack now that they're finished with us. We're under attack.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, do you think the veteran community understands this as a whole? Because, a lot of the folks that I know who are veterans, they've kind of taken really a very hardline Republican view of some of this stuff. and because the flag's been waved in their face, and we need to get those those greedy union members in line. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that.
Well, I'll tell you, there are anywhere between 2.5 and 3 million veterans currently in the active roles of the unions affiliated with the AFL-CIO. And when people say, "Oh, well, the veteran community is, sort of taking a Republican approach," one of the reasons that we're so successful at the Union Veterans Council in growing, and we are growing, Rick. I'll tell you, in the last 5 months, we've been growing by about 5,000 new members a month. And the reason for that is we are the only group, as far as I can tell, that is out there talking to, with, and about veterans as a class.
Right.
And talking about economic issues, lifting up the fact that, people have been sent all over the world under the banner of fighting to protect democracy and freedom, and then they're coming back home and they're do everything they can by the government to not have democracy and freedom of their own. They are sent out. We're sent out to ensure our nation has a future, and now we come back home and we're struggling to see if we can even have a future of our own. For every report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that comes out that says, well, veteran unemployment's going down, well, there's another report you can look at from Feeding America that says the number of veterans seeking assistance at food pantries is going up.
And homeless.
Absolutely.
Which is a national disgrace, Will.
It is. Absolutely. There's no reason. When people talk about veterans homeless, people talk about, the health care we earn, which is under attack, constantly under attack by, this radical fringe led by the Koch brothers, led by the Concerned Veterans for America, folks who want to privatize VA health care. They just had a bill in the Senate last week from Marco Rubio, who actually decided to show up to go to work one day. And what did he come to town for? To try to pass a bill that would have stripped due process from all VA employees, including whistleblowers, over 100,000 of whom are veterans themselves.
Wow.
I mean, this is just this assault on the veteran class it's never ending. And it's carried out by those same people who come wrapped in the flag, talking about apple pie and that somebody's going to take your gun. So vote against your economic interest. Vote against your family's best interest. And the more and more that we can work to communicate to our membership as well as the general public that the working class and the veteran class are getting organized, we are coming together and we're going to educate people on where folks really are on those issues.
Yeah,
So
I'll be honest with you. I've been waiting for a Coxey's Army type event where the unemployed and the underemployed and the low wage workforce of this country say enough is enough already and take to the streets.
Well, I'll tell you, there are millions of veterans in this country, and like I mentioned earlier, they just as every person who's gone to war before them have by and large come from the working class, and they're coming home. And the difference in today's veteran versus 170 years ago is they're not coming home to a factory, not coming home to a mill, not coming home to a country that wants to build up its infrastructure to make it competitive in the future. They're coming home to standing in line at food pantries. They're coming in home to standing in line to apply for the lowest wage job, and with people actively trying to pay them even a lower wage, or they're coming home to no job at all. And I'll tell you, we hear a lot about veteran suicide and veteran mental health. It is my firm belief that you cannot have a conversation about veterans' mental health and the veteran suicide rate without also talking about the unemployment and employment situation facing veterans. You want to big time impact the veteran suicide rate? Institute full employment for veterans, and you'll see it happen.
Absolutely. No, I'm right there with you. And this is where I've always said that, if the private sector can't or won't do it, this is where government has to be the employer of last resort.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about Apprenticeship Week. I mean, here you have an example, a wonderful example of people who are doing something about it. The men and women of the North America's building trade unions who are running these joint apprenticeship training centers. They're getting people skills, but now it's on us collectively as a working class to get people to actually build stuff. We have a disastrous infrastructure. I think it's a D- rating from the American Society of Civil Engineers.
Yeah.
And, we have a lot of folks, a lot of veterans who are ready, willing, and able to build this country's infrastructure in a way to make us competitive going into the 21st century.
Yeah, and do it again as past generations have done. And, to highlight how screwed up our infrastructure is, I usually use the quote from Thomas Friedman, whom I'm not a huge fan, but he said, going from Beijing to LAX was like going from the Jetsons to the Flintstones. I think that's a perfect analogy. So in looking at what you do, Will, as the executive director of the Union Veterans Council, I understand you guys are collecting names and trying to get people involved. There's an action at your website to join up at unionveterans.org, correct?
Yes, there is.
What do we get? What do we do when we sign up?
So when you sign up for the Union Veterans Council, you will receive, from the beginning, you'll be receiving a newsletter from me. We always will feature sort of a legislative item, a organizing item, and then usually another news piece. And then we also always will feature a photo from the field. We have Union Veterans Council hard hat stickers, and as you can imagine, they're very, very popular. And every week we'll always feature a photo from the field that somebody has taken in. On top of that, you will receive information about legislative activities and political activities going on in your state. And we will also, as I'm always traveling, I'm always on the road. And when I come to your state, we will be working with you. And we're in the process now of eventually getting to the point where we can help folks try to start building up local councils on their own. It's certainly nothing chartered or anything like that, but just bringing union members who are veterans and those union members and potential union members who care about veterans together to discuss the issues in their community and workplace.
Creating a network of folks who are concerned about the issues. And I've always said, if you were one of those people who slapped the little ribbon on your car because we support the troops, maybe you take that next step and actually do something that's really going to help support them, and that is help them get a job.
I've always wanted to see if I could go over to the utility company and pay my electric bill with all the yellow ribbons I've been given. It's appreciated. It's appreciated when somebody thanks you for your service. But what veterans in this country need more than anything is not to be thanked at a Steelers game. It's not to be have a yellow ribbon put on their car. What it is, it's a job. And it's a job that allows somebody to own a home, raise a family if they want to, and be able to retire someday.
With a little bit of dignity and respect. Doesn't seem too much to me. Will, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Hope folks will go to unionveterans.org, sign up for the email, sign up for the list, throw your name into the ring of how you can help. It seems like the least we can do. Will, I appreciate it, man.
Thank you. And check us out on Facebook as well at Union Veterans Council, folks.
And we'll make sure we get links at thericksmithshow.com. Again, unionveterans.org, the website. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Say the USA is drowning in crafted lies. Say the USA and resume the ties it bind. Stop taking all our money and shipping it offshore. Do the job you're looking for.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
Poor old Jeb seems to have a terminal case of Mitt Romney disease. He just keeps blurting out asinine comments that reveal the fact that he is, in heart, soul, and political mindset, yet another son of a Bush. His inner bigotry against the poor, coupled with his cartoonish concept of the black community's political motivation, was outed recently when he was asked how he planned to win the votes of African Americans. Our message is one of hope and aspiration, he responded. Okay, Jeb, go positive. So far, so good. But then the deep prejudice derived from his narrow upbringing as a child of privilege surfaced. My campaign message is not one of division and get in line and we'll take care of you with free stuff, he asserted with a sneer. Then, to punctuate his little lecture on how to appeal to low-income black families, the multimillionaire heir to the Bush fortune said he would tell them, you can achieve earned success. Yes, Jeb, instead of hard-hit people who've been downsized or left jobless lining up to get what you call free stuff, like unemployment compensation and health care, better to challenge them to earn success. Tell them to have the gumption, as you did, to be born to rich parents, to be welcomed as legacy applicants into the most prestigious schools, and to have their fathers open the doors for them to achieve financial and political success. This is Jim Hightower saying, yet the former shoo-in for the GOP presidential nomination can't figure out why he's running third in New Hampshire and fifth in Iowa, even after he poured millions into a month-long blitz of TV ads to goose up his appeal. Such shallowness, callousness, and condescension exposes an ingrained contempt for all who don't live in Bush's elite zip code. No one but his fellow one-percenters want a clueless guy like that in the White House.
To get more of Jim Hightower's populist take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to, visit www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
We need to stand united for undivided, we shall never fall. Remember all, we need to trust in and then forever call our brothers and our sisters. And are you and I are win? You and I both know that we can rely on it. The time is prime, planets aligned and no mistaken. For union resurrection, the anger has awakened. The sleeping giant, come on, yeah, we can do it. We need to revive, re-amp, and re-up the labor movement.
I think about that. When I grew up as a kid, I remember seeing all the veterans coming home from Vietnam. And I guess that's how I ended up with my jaded view of the military, in that, those guys were just dumped back into our community with broken minds, broken bodies, horrible drug and alcohol problems. And just in our community, what I saw, just dumped and left for, whatever. And I remember people in July walking around with the heavy green army coats on, muttering to themselves. And, just lost individuals who didn't have a path forward and didn't have a job. And I think Will is absolutely spot on when he says, you want to solve some of those mental health problems? Get people employed. Get them a reason to wake up tomorrow. Get them a reason to look to the future. Get them a reason to think that tomorrow is going to be a better day, and still, instead of being stuck kind of where they are. And I don't think we've done enough. We got into this mess, and we can argue for days about why. But at the end of the day, we need to take care of the people who went and fought in our name in those wars. It's that simple to me. It doesn't get any simpler for me. And while all those politicians like Steve King are out there waving the flag and photo ops with people in uniform and draping themselves in the flag, something like he's trying to do and destroying prevailing wage that helps disproportionately, I would argue, and maybe rightly so, our veterans, something he wants to destroy. Now, real quick, because I only got a couple minutes here, you'll hear the right wing ad nauseum throw out this 30% number. We can save 30% on building costs. Just from a purely, now look, I'm not a mathematician, but just purely on common sense. Labor on any building project, any high rise, any build, whatever, labor is no more than 22%. 18 to 22% is the number that's been thrown at me. So in order to save 30% on a building project, think it through for me. If you're talking 22% at the high end for labor costs, how much would the workers have to pay the company to save that 30%? Just kind of a thought. It's ludicrous. It's ridiculous. What they're talking about is they want to destroy union wages, because the unions are the ones who report their wages. Non-union companies don't do it. They could, but they don't. And here in Pennsylvania, they won't. They'll just choose to go the legislative process to destroy good family-sustaining wages. And I'll tell you why this is a bad idea. First, obviously, less money in the pockets of workers, less disposable income to go through a local economy to support small businesses. That's the first bad. The second bad is you destroy your local construction industry. The people who do it, they'll go somewhere else to make a living somewhere else, which means you'll have transient labor coming through. And what they leave behind, they don't care. Then you have the brain drain problem that goes when you don't have those people who do it. And guess what happens? When the transients come through, they gouge your eyes out because you no longer have a local industry. That's the game plan by our friends on the right wing. And it's kind of scary if you think about it. It's kind of scary what we let them get away with. Anyway, if you want to check out more, unionveterans.org. Highly suggest signing up for their newsletter. Quick break. Right back with Hour 3. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Don't let us get stupid, all right. Just make us be brave. Make us play nice. Let us be together tonight.
Thought-provoking, intelligent conversation with a heart. The voice of the working class, Rick Smith. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The labor movement's drive to raise the wage for workers is especially critical for working women, especially women of color. Women fill the ranks of low-wage workers even as they are paid less across the board than men. AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Liz Schuler recently spoke to the National Women's Law Center about working women's need for a voice on the job. She said asserting that voice will raise the wage for millions of women while improving working conditions for working people, but only if workers unite in solidarity and demand it.
We need to join together and speak out for good wages, great benefits, fair scheduling, and equal pay at work. We need to demand paid sick leave, paid family leave, and quality childcare. And these things are accessible and are available to us if we stick together. We need to make our voices heard because the status quo is not working. A typical woman who works full-time loses more than $500,000 over her lifetime because we are paid less than men. $500,000. That's staggering. Women are the majority in low-wage jobs. Women have a greater responsibility at home, but if we don't have the benefit of a union, we're unlikely to have earned sick leave or paid family leave.
Schuler says the labor movement has historically been too slow to address the racial economic disparity being experienced by women of color.
Women of color experience lower median weekly earnings, higher rates of poverty, and greater unemployment. While women overall make 79 cents on the dollar, I think it just went up, Black women and Hispanic women only make 63 cents and 54 cents respectively. Yet the women's movement and, let's face it, the labor movement have been slow to address these issues. Feminists, we've got to stand up for all working women.
The Chicago Teachers Union is encouraging its members to save money to weather a possible strike. Thousands of teachers in Chicago are facing layoffs starting as early as January. The union says Mayor Rahm Emanuel's hand-picked school's CEO has plans to lay off 5,000 teachers and claims that the layoffs could start in January. The Chicago Teachers Union says mass layoffs only exacerbate the current 50% teacher turnover rate. On Thursday, the union will hold an official practice strike vote in all Chicago public schools. A teachers union rally is set for November 23rd in Grant Park. Labor contract talks are in mediation as negotiations on a new contract continue.
Workers Independent News is heard daily on The Rick Smith Show, live 3 to 6 p.m. coast to coast at thericksmithshow.com. The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
WIN is made possible in part through underwriting support from the United Steelworkers. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
The Rick Smith Show, changing America for the better.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So on Monday, the president was out at Rutgers University there in New Jersey and said, look, I'm taking some federal action. We're going to do something to ban the box on federal applications and a couple of other things that I think are important. And the idea is, look, once you've paid your debt to society, you shouldn't have to continue to pay over and over again. So they're going to take the box of have you been convicted of a crime, I guess, off of the application for prospective government employees. And I think that's a step forward. As the president said, the federal government should not use criminal history to screen out applicants before we even look at their qualifications. And this is something many civil rights, many labor rights organizations have touted as an idea to move forward to help as many as 1 million workers in this country find and keep gainful employment, and also keep folks from who've committed crimes from doing it again, which is why I thought it was a good opportunity to reach out, talk a little bit about this, which is why I've asked Rebecca Vallis. She's the director of policy for Poverty to Prosperity program there at the Center for American Progress. Rebecca, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks so much for having me on. This is an important conversation, Rick.
I think so as well, because I got to tell you, this morning I had a conversation with a friend who years ago did something really dumb as a kid and ended up with a record and ended up, every job he applied for either had to check the box and be ignored or not check the box and eventually get fired for not checking the box. So I think this is a step in the right direction.
I could not agree more. And unfortunately, your friend is far from alone. The reality is that the legacy of our nation's failed experiment with mass incarceration and more broadly, over-criminalization is that between 70 million and 100 million Americans today, that's 1 in 3 of us, have some type of criminal record. And it can be basically an intractable barrier to employment, but also to a lot of other things that you need when you're reentering your community, like housing, like education, and even reunifying with your family. So the president's announcements on Monday were a huge, huge step in the right direction. Really taking the conversation from just being about sentencing reform, which is a hugely important part of criminal justice reform, but also recognizing that what happens when people get out is really important and has a lot to do with whether we're going to see them go right back in.
No, I mean, because if you can't find a job, if you can't support yourself, your family, and all that, eventually you revert right back to what got you in there, probably in the first place. And, the sad reality is what we've done with our prison industrial complex is we've created incentives for-profit prison corporations to really lobby against and want people to come back so we can fill, the heads in beds.
Yeah, the reality is, especially on the employment side of things today, nearly 9 in 10 employers use criminal background checks as part of their hiring process. And as you noted in the opening, the federal government has been right alongside, those employers doing that as well. And so as a result, about 60% of formerly incarcerated people are still unemployed 1 year after they've been released. And so often what happens is, crimes of survival. People need to find a way to eat. They need to be able to try to make ends meet and scrape by. And so really sadly, a lot of the recidivism that people, end up engaging in is like stealing small amounts of food or basic necessities like toilet paper. And that's often what gets them right back behind bars. Making sure that people have a fair shot at employment is absolutely what we should be doing within the federal government, but also across the country. And that's part of what we've been seeing over the course of the last several years has been this movement sweeping the nation, ban the box. 19 states and now more than 100 cities actually have ban the box policies in place saying, you know what, people should get a fair shake and we should let them show us that they're qualified for the job before we just throw their resume in the trash because of a record.
Before it ends up in the circular file. And what's interesting to me is, our laws have been focused in a way that when people do those things, steal toilet paper or something to feed their families, the law comes down with, with the iron fist. But when the bankers crashed our economy and stole trillions, that's okay.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, that's been a lot of the discussion that we've been having, really, in a bipartisan basis nationally around criminal justice reform, is how to make it more fair, how to make it more equitable, because people really do feel a lot of outrage about precisely those kinds of disparate treatment that you just described.
So let me ask you, what exactly did the president do on Monday? What's the directive, and how's it going to affect? Who's it going to affect first, and then how's it going to affect workers across the country?
Sure. So what the president announced is that he is calling on the Office of Personnel Management, OPM. They handle hiring and firing for the feds. He called on them to develop regulations to ban the box in federal hiring. And so, as I said, it mirrors what's been going on in states and municipalities across the country, in that it takes that question, have you ever been convicted of an offense, off of the initial application. And now, just to be clear, it doesn't mean that criminal history will never be considered in the hiring process. It just delays the point where you ask that question so that someone has actually had a chance to show you kind of who they are and that they're qualified for the job before being automatically disqualified.
Right. It's something that we did here in Pennsylvania a number of years ago on workers' comp claims. And I remember that, they took that off the box. And I think it's actually nationally that the employers initially can't ask about it. It's not something that they won't ever find out, but it was always used as something to go up next. And this, another one of those scenarios.
And it's also something that the city of Philadelphia did as well, just a couple of years back. So definitely a trend that we're seeing nationwide. And we've also seen private corporations taking that step voluntarily. We've seen Walmart and Target, and most recently Coke Industries, all announce that they are going to themselves ban the box because they want to make sure that they're giving job seekers a fair shake in the hiring process. But I should note, we still have a lot to sort of see in terms of where this OPM regulation goes. One of the things that really is going to matter a great deal is where in the process that question gets asked. Are they just taking that box off of the application, or are they pushing it until the very end of the process where the employer is ready to make an offer? That's considered to be the best practice. So I think it remains to be seen how that's really going to shape up. And the other piece I'll mention is, in the course of making this announcement on Monday, the president also called on Congress to pass a piece of bipartisan legislation called the Fair Chance Act. And that's been championed by Senator Cory Booker and also a Republican Senator, Ron Johnson. And what that legislation would do is both to delay consideration of the record until that end of the process, like I mentioned, but it would also extend to federal contractors, not just to hiring for federal agencies. And so the president said, you know what, my announcement about OPM is just the first step. That bipartisan bill is the next piece that we need.
And to get it to the president's desk. And because, one of the concerns that somebody I was talking to earlier had is, okay, so we're going to ban the box and we're going to go, the pendulum will swing to the other side. We're not going to ask. So are we going to have pedophiles as crossing guards? And I said, I seriously doubt that's where this goes. But I think it's an important first step in getting people at least an interview.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And as I said, it doesn't mean that employers and in this case federal agencies won't be able to ask about criminal history. It just delays the point in the process where they ask that question. So we're not going to see public safety concerns like the one you just mentioned.
And it's, I think, an important first step because, in going back to, you look at coming out of prison and our prison costs are astronomical. We lock up more people than any nation in the world. And as you pointed out, when 1 in 3 people have something of a record, you kind of got to go, is there something with our legal system that maybe we should be looking at?
No, you're exactly right. I think people are really familiar with the costs of mass incarceration. Those are statistics that often have been thrown around now that we're having this bipartisan conversation about criminal justice reform. So we're spending $80 billion a year to lock people up left and right. That number rises to $260 billion a year if you add in policing and legal and judicial services. But the barriers that are associated with having a criminal record, and specifically shutting people out of the labor force like we've been talking about, those have a real cost to our economy as well. And actually estimates put that cost at $65 billion a year in terms of lost gross domestic product. So, even if you're not persuaded that this is the right thing to do, it's costing our nation's bottom line.
Yeah, and hugely. And I look at this, and the reality is for pretty much my adult life, we've looked at the criminal justice system and incarceration as retribution instead of rehabilitation. And I think a refocusing is something that we need to have. When 1 in 3, I mean, that's a staggering number. That means that, half of my friends, 1 in 3 of my friends could have had some kind of a record. And if I wanted to look, I could probably find it. Anything's on the internet these days. But it seems like a refocus needs to be had, not just in banning the box, but something much greater.
No, that I could not agree more. And thankfully, that's been a lot of what has been included in some of the bipartisan legislation that we've seen moving through the House and Senate in the last several weeks is an increased focus on rehabilitation and on preparing people for reentry long before they actually are released from a correctional facility. So definitely an important step in the right direction. But, along these lines, another piece of what the president announced on Monday that's really important, and it's getting a lot less attention than the ban the box piece, is he announced guidance from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and guidance that is directed to public housing authorities. And what it says is, you guys have been excluding people with, who have even been looked at the wrong way by a cop, right? People who have arrest records that didn't even lead to a conviction.
Right.
They have been excluding people from living in public housing for years, and unfairly so, and in a way that has made it really hard for people with records to ever find safe and stable and affordable housing, which is really a crucial piece of reentry, and it has really important anti-recidivism effects. So that guidance says, you guys need to stop just ruling people out because they have arrest records. You need to take a look at these people individually and say, do they pose a risk to safety, or should we let them live here? And that's a really big deal as well.
Yeah. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're here with Rebecca Valla. She's the Director of Policy for the Poverty to Prosperity Program at the Center for American Progress. You can take a look at their website. Just click on Rebecca's name at thericksmithshow.com. Take you right to the article there. But, here's the thing that I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. I remember, and we lived in public housing, and I remember at the time, the argument was, we'll keep the felons, we'll keep the bad people out, and it will be a disincentive to commit crimes because then you won't be able to live here. I remember all of that, talking about it being, the risk and reward and all that stuff. It seems that, things have gone so far that now we need to revisit maybe some of those arguments of the past.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, we're in a place where a third of people who are released from incarceration have no idea where they're going to go. They expect to go to homeless shelters when they get out. And that's not setting them up to successfully reenter. That's setting them right up to end back behind bars. And so if we want to shrink the recidivism rate, which is currently at 2/3, right? 2/3 of people released from incarceration end up going right back behind bars. If we want to shrink that rate, which is really a critical piece of reducing mass incarceration, then we need to make sure that people actually have access to housing as well as jobs, like we were talking about before. Another important piece of what the president announced on Monday to that end is a new grant to support permanent supportive housing for returning citizens. So definitely a huge piece of the puzzle. And if we fail to include these kinds of measures in what we're doing, the president said, we're really going to fail at criminal justice reform.
Yeah, it's important that you brought that up because I actually knew someone a number of years ago who had gotten out of prison, spent 2 years in prison for, something stupid, just did something really dumb. And, had he not had a family to come back to, he would have been homeless on the street. And at the time, I had thought there was a process to bring people and reintegrate them into society. There's not. I thought there were halfway houses and things for people to kind of move back into. Evidently, and at the time, I was wrong.
Well, there definitely are halfway houses, and there are some, supports
Some.
and service providers that exist. But I think the fact is that they've been underfunded for a long time. And also, it's great that we can provide services, but if we're also simultaneously closing every door in someone's face, telling them, nope, you can't find a job, nope, you can't find housing, nope, you can't get any education or training, all because of your record, we're basically sentencing people to a life sentence to poverty, even though they've already paid their debt to society. So that's a lot of what this is about, is saying, you know what, we've got to undo these government obstacles in the form of poorly designed public policies, so that we can give people a chance to successfully reenter.
Yeah, all the retribution and all the punitive penalties that we throw in the way. Last line of questioning I've got for you comes back down to the money, because here before we threw Tom Corbett out of office here as the governor, one of his great moments was we're gonna let people out of prison because it's going to save us money. And under this guise that we're going to save a boatload of money, we just threw people back out onto the streets. It was my thought at the time we should have been spending some of that money giving those folks jobs, even if it was stuff that government has to be the employer of last resort. Spending some of that money to do the housing and all of those things. Is there any push towards maybe saying, okay, we're going to save money, but we're going to use that in a different way?
There is definitely a push to do that. We've seen some states already starting to do that. So in California, they passed a ballot measure called Proposition 47, and that was all about redirecting funding away from mass incarceration, because they were going to be letting people who didn't need to be behind bars out of prison, and redirecting that money into supportive services, into reentry services, into mental health services, and also into education, so that we can be preventing people from moving right along that school to prison pipeline, before they even get behind bars. So that's a huge piece of what we should be talking about as well.
Good stuff all the way around, and I think it'd be a great opportunity to change our society, change our focus. Good stuff all the way around. Of course, if you want to take a look at the report, there are a number of pieces that I'll put up at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Rebecca's name; it'll take you right there. Rebecca, I appreciate you taking a little time for us. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me on, Rick.
Great talking with you, Rebecca Vallis. She's the director of policy for the Poverty to Prosperity program there at the Center for American Progress. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
We want the world and we want it now. We're going to take it anyhow. We want the airwaves.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Got milk? If you lived in Neillsville, Wisconsin, the answer might have been no. And on this day in labor history, the year was 1933. Wisconsin was known as the dairy state. In the 1930s, it was the largest producer of milk in the country. The price of milk fell during the Great Depression, and farmers received a smaller percentage of the proceeds. A cooperative group of dairy farmers objected to the low prices set by the larger dairy plants. Farmers who produced milk for bottling remained solvent. However, farmers who produced milk for cheese, butter, and other dairy products were driven into poverty. Some dairy farmers banded together and decided not to sell milk unless a previously agreed upon price was met. They were vastly outnumbered, as many farmers sold at the reduced price. The strikers resorted to roadblocks to prevent delivery to the manufacturers. If a truck driver refused to turn back, the strikers forcibly dumped the milk at the roadside. Sometimes the strikers tainted the delivered milk with kerosene or oil. They also targeted creameries, causing damage to 7 during the strike. The state tried to break up the roadblocks or use convoys to escort trucks. Non-striking farmers attempted to deliver milk via railways, but some rail lines were also blocked by strikers. The October to November strike was the third in a series of milk strikes in Wisconsin. Thousands of gallons of milk were dumped. A 60-year-old farmer was killed at a picket line in one Wisconsin town. In all, farmers lost $10 million during the strike.
No milk today, it seems a common sight, but people passing by don't know the reason why. How could they know? Just just what this message means. The end of my hopes, the end of all my dreams.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Behind the door where my love reigns.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been talking about everyone's need for good transportation systems and how America has built theirs in big leaps and bounds. I've mentioned that I would only need 2 books to do a good job teaching a class on American democracy. The one I mentioned earlier is I-69 by Matt Dillinger. The other, Nothing Like It in the World, The Men Who Built the Transcontinental Railroad, written by Stephen Ambrose, is a detailed account of the vast project of building a railroad in the 1860s that spanned the North American continent. Though the politics of each of these 2 projects are much alike, and both are instructive about American democracy, it's the Transcontinental Railroad that I want to focus on for the remainder of this story. The idea of building a railroad that connected the Atlantic with the Pacific was first published in 1832. Join us again for 37 years from start to finish. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Just a day job that someone's got to do. It's kinda hard when everyone looks up to you. Try to make it look easy, gonna make it look good, like anybody would. I'm just your average.
So William sends me an email, and thank you, William. I appreciate it. Not so thrilled with the content, but thanks for taking time to send me an email. And you can email us here at rick@thericksmithshow.com, pointing out that maybe we should just give them all college educations, coddle them from cradle to grave. And it goes on a conversation about the punishment angle that our criminal justice system must continue. And there is that thought out there that the reason that we have the penalty phase in this is that, it is about punishment. It is about a life of being stained with, this is going to follow you forever. If you've ever seen the movie Rock and Roll High School, the Ramones did this, black mark, it'll follow you forever and ever. It's going to follow you to the day you die. And that's, kind of this idea that some have, that we need to make it so that, you make a mistake and it follows you forever. Like just having it tattooed right to your forehead. Now, there are some things where you go, maybe there's some justifications. Nobody wants a pedophile working as a crossing guard. Nobody. But, if you're young and you do something dumb, and I know people who have done it. And look, I did a bunch of dumb stuff when I was a kid, too. Fortunately, it didn't hamper my future ability to gain employment or anything like that. But sometimes you make a dumb mistake and you pay the penalty. You serve the time, and you come out and say, you know what? I did what I was supposed to do. All should be somewhat forgiven. What we've done in this country, when 1 in 3 people in this country have a record, let me be the first to say problem. Maybe we've got too many laws. Maybe there's too many things to where you're interacting with the criminal justice system. And, I remember back during the 90s, all these zero tolerance plans, because look, we were losing jobs. People were desperate. And just like I talked about earlier with the veterans, you want to solve some of their problems with mental health issues and with suicide rates and that, give them a reason to wake up tomorrow. I say the same thing about people who have come out of jail or people who have had hard times. Give them a reason to wake up in the morning. And if they can't find a job in the private sector, I've always said you've got to have a way for hands not to be idled. You've got to have a mechanism, something, be it government of last resort, whatever, but you've got to have a reason for people to wake up. And, the reality is we've got too many idle hands still. Labor force participation is down, the unemployment rate's falling, but the labor participation is falling too. So for me, a highway bill that didn't destroy wages seems sane, seems rational. I remember my grandfather telling me when he got back from World War II that jobs were plentiful. If one guy didn't treat you right, you went across the street and you worked for somebody else. And until you found somebody who did treat you right, you didn't put up with nonsense like people do today. because we went through a couple of years where, I don't care, they can steal wages from me and take my benefits and make me work longer hours for less pay and all of that stuff, but I'm just happy to have a job. Well, the hope is that we get back to a time where, like my grandparents' generation, they didn't treat you while you went across the street, or you stood there and you organized that place and made them treat you well. I say we may be coming back to that. This younger generation and maybe my kids' generation, they're going to be my grandparents. They're going to be that era because they're going to say, you know what? We've seen our parents struggle. We've seen our grandparents struggle. And now it's time for us to make sure that our kids don't struggle. So I'm optimistic of what the future has to hold because I see the organizing going on. But it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time for us to fight back against what's been put in our way. And I look at these zero tolerance policies on really just on nonviolent offenses, which is just ridiculous. Other than it is what it is. It's about putting cash in these big corporations' pockets. I mean, the prison pipeline is real. When you sign contracts with these privateers that say you'll have 95% occupancy, that just seems dumb to me. Because then you start tailoring policies to make sure we can lock people up. So I think what the president did, good thing. Maybe we should be talking about doing it on a much bigger scale. Quick break, right back.
Unusually powerful tropical cyclone heading towards Yemen, of all places.
The first ever hurricane for the nation of Yemen.
Yes, they should.
Hillary supports an investigation of Exxon. Record warm oceans blamed for the collapse of Maine's cod fishery. Plus, TransCanada calls timeout on its controversial Keystone XL pipeline.
For now, all of those timeouts and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
A new study says that by the end of this century, the Persian Gulf might be too hot to support human life. So finally, peace in the Middle East.
Oh, thank Allah. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, big story, I think, as we go to air today. TransCanada says, never mind about that whole Keystone XL pipeline?
Yep. TransCanada, the owner of the controversial proposed Keystone XL pipeline, has requested the U.S. State Department to suspend its application for a cross-border permit. TransCanada says the pipeline route is undergoing a new state review in Nebraska, but environmental groups suggest the move is actually an attempt to prevent President Obama from rejecting it. No application, no rejection.
Of course, if Hillary Clinton wins in 2016, she has already said she would reject it. So they're gambling, they're hoping, they're praying that a Republican wins in 2016, I guess.
That's apparently it. TransCanada did leave open the option of trying again after the 2016 election. And yes, all of the 2016 Republican candidates support the pipeline.
I'm glad they note they are trying to work out something with Nebraska concerning the route, because it gives me the opportunity to mention that the whole reason this thing has been delayed so long in the first place is because Nebraska Republicans rejected the original route for that Keystone XL pipeline.
Another question is whether ongoing eminent domain lawsuits from landowners in Nebraska whose property has been seized for the pipeline will be allowed to go through. Speaking of elections, Election Day 2016 is now 1 year away. The Democratic presidential primary is also now down to 3 candidates. Harvard Law professor Lawrence Lessig, who focused on campaign finance reform as the linchpin to solving major challenges like climate change, dropped out of the race on Monday. Unlike in the Republican Party, all of the Democratic candidates accept climate science and only differ on how to address it. Meanwhile, Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton now says she supports the idea of a Justice Department investigation into oil giant Exxon after new revelations that Exxon deliberately misled the public and funded groups to deny the global scientific consensus on dangerous climate change. Clinton's remarks come 2 weeks after fellow Democratic candidates Senator Bernie Sanders and former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley already announced their support.
And they also come only after she was asked about it. She did not go out of her way to make that statement that she'd like to see Exxon investigated. It was sort of done in a hallway off stage during a campaign event.
In other news, the year 2015 has already smashed the record for the highest number of Category 4 and 5 storms ever recorded. And now, in the Middle East, the nation of Yemen on the Arabian Peninsula is seeing its first ever hurricane on record. According to CNN meteorologist Tom Sater, Cyclone Shapala could dump as much as 8 years of rain in 2 days on the arid nation.
This is going to drop several years worth of rainfall, which is going to cause massive debris flows and flash flooding. This is a big, big deal here. You just don't see this kind of rain in this area. Something unprecedented we haven't seen in this part of the world.
Oh, it's just a coincidence. Nothing to worry about. Climate changing? What are you talking about?
And just want to note for the record, like Hurricane Patricia in the Pacific a few weeks ago, Cyclone Shapala also intensified with similar record speed. Yemen is a nation already suffering a major humanitarian crisis stemming from years of violent conflict, and Cyclone Shapala will not help. In the U.S., the same record warm ocean temperatures are blamed for the collapse of Maine's commercial cod fishing industry. Despite new stringent catch limits, scientists say the rapid warming of ocean waters off the coast of New England has contributed to the collapse of the fishery. Fishery managers say they did not expect the ocean to warm so quickly or disrupt cod numbers so fast, and thus their catch limit quotas allowed too much cod to be taken this year. Finally, good news and bad news in Antarctica. Antarctica is experiencing a net gain of ice for now. According to NASA, snow is accumulating on the middle of the continent at a faster rate than the ice is melting away around its edges. The scientists say the good news is that means Antarctica isn't adding to rising sea levels. But the bad news is that means the current rise in sea levels isn't from Antarctica, which means it's coming from somewhere they haven't accounted for yet.
Outer space?
Probably not.
Damn. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget, you can download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
You're as cold as ice. You're willing to sacrifice our love.
Demanding the super rich to pay their fair share for once. The Rick Smith Show.
I got a bad case. I'm turning it up. It's been cold in here, so fire it up. I got a bad case. I'm turning it up. It's been cold in here, so somebody fire it up.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So John sends me an email here talking about the ban the box, which I got to be honest, I still think is a very good idea. In looking back over the years and thinking about friends that I've had who, like I said, have done some dumb things that, not indicative of who they are. And it's kind of one of those things that, one of those moments of conversations I've had with my kids, especially my oldest daughter. We say, you make a mistake, make sure it's not one that follows you for the rest of your life. And, it could be anything dumb. You get something on your record that you then have to write down on an application, especially during tough times. You can see how those applications, the first weeding out process is, well, they committed a crime. Don't care what it is. Don't care on investigating to the pile. And when you look at 1 in 3 people having something of a record, you kind of go, at what point does it not become everybody's got one, so it doesn't matter? At the end of this, though, and this is, something I've talked about, for a long time. with the unemployment rate as high as it was, at some point you have to do what other countries have done, and that is institute policies and rules that give people employment. One of the things I would have loved to have seen after the 2008 collapse, after the Bush era, Wall Street in free fall, go back to 2008, 2009. Remember 800, 900,000 jobs a month being lost. We're talking hundreds of thousands, millions of people whose life now in chaos, losing their homes, losing their insurance, losing all kinds of pain and suffering. And I remember saying then what we should be doing, creating a program, cutting, change the minimum hour, change the maximum hour laws, take it down to 32 hours before paying over, then start paying overtime. Make employers keep more people. Don't let them just continually dump folks. It's it's one of those things that's just kind of frustrating. And I remember saying at the time that honestly and truthfully, change the number of hours, give people either unemployment to make up the difference, but make sure that folks have a way to keep those jobs. And also some stability in our economy. At the end of this, what we're talking about is a stable society, and this is what policy should be able to do. It should be able to give us the opportunity to say, you know what, it's just time to make sure that folks have an opportunity to keep a job. And and I've said the same thing about like food stamp programs. I don't believe in handout programs. I think what you need are programs that give people a reason to wake up in the morning. Solid jobs programs. And, with those kind of solid jobs programs, the opportunity to do more. Anyway, let's go to the phone line, see who's on line one. And welcome to the Rick Smith Show. What's on your mind? And they hung up. I hate when that happens. Happens occasionally, but it is what it is. In looking at, you go back to this and looking at the reality of change our maximum hour laws, because look, technology is doing an awful lot more. We've got more people, less jobs are going to be necessary. I think a serious conversation has to be had about how do we change our hour system? How do we change our culture to make sure that people can make a living and not working 50, 60, 70 hours a week, 2-3 jobs, all of that stuff. To me, that's where we need to go. Let's give this a try one more time. See who's on line one. This is the Rick Smith Show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Rick, this is Luke Vargas calling in.
Luke, how are you, man?
I'm good. I just had to pull a bunch of illegal traffic maneuvers in Belgrade to move my car across the interstate, basically. So I'm sorry I'm a few minutes late.
I don't want you to have to go to jail or do anything, especially overseas, man. How are things over there?
Pretty good. Belgrade is where I began my journey. It is where it will end as well. I wouldn't have structured this trip this way if it made it a little bit more economical to return a rental car to a different city than where you pick it up. But thus I traveled about 10 extra hours in the car to get back here.
Wow. So what did you see?
Well, I was down in Macedonia. I was in, I guess, Slovenia when we talked last, and did basically another 15 hours of driving south to get to the Macedonian border for a day visit there. And sort of saw what I expected to see, which is that this migration route gets worse as you go further south, and going in the reverse direction much better as you get closer to Germany, countries like that. Not terribly surprising, but the thing that I'm hearing about, and I've seen about as much as I possibly could, and done as many interviews with actual people as I could squeeze in. We're now hearing actual policy news this week, and today the Swedish Prime Minister basically dropped a bomb on the European Union, saying essentially, this is not sustainable. Sweden is not going to be able to receive people the way we used to, and that the country is now going to be asking the EU to help them send people out of Sweden. I mean, I'm just looking at the numbers here, and Sweden has played a very big role in sort of allowing this crisis to be mitigated until now. And if you take Sweden out of the picture and take these statements, which do seem very earnest, and this is not a prime minister who's inclined to bombast and to just be saying things to try to achieve some political effect, I think Sweden is ending its period of really opening up its country to everyone who wants to be there. And that just pushes the burden elsewhere. And I really, I was kind of hopeful even a few days ago, and then you hear news like this, and the UN just came out with new numbers overnight saying that 218,000 people arrived in Europe via boat just last month alone.
Wow.
It's probably going to be 300,000 this month. There's not the political will at all in Europe to be able to deal with this. And I just don't, this may be the straw that breaks the camel's back of the European Union. I felt confident saying borders aren't going to keep closing, but now I think they might. And I think this European Union is actually threatened by these numbers now. And that's something we all need to sort of think about the implications of, because, people talk about anti-immigrant sentiment in Germany and being on the rise in certain places. The one thing that is going to hasten that even more than new arrivals is the people tying together the failing of this political group with these migrants. And, one really wonders how much that could accelerate the sort of the rise of the extreme right on this continent.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of this, you look at it now, you're talking about, okay, we're going to set up another situation where these people are going to be there because they're there, now they're illegal. And then we start, all of that stuff, kind of what we've done here. Nothing good comes of that.
Yeah, and in the next chapter, let's just assume the European Union doesn't crumble in the next few months. Inevitably, deportations are going to need to occur on a mass scale. I mean, you take all of the people who are applying for status, and about 50% of them will be successful, but 50% are going to fail. I mean, in a given month, that could, just looking at the arrivals this month, can Europe be deporting 110,000 people a month to Turkey?
Wow.
I mean, what's Turkey going to do? And how many of them are going to come back? And how are governments and police forces going to respond when people return a second time or a third time after having their applications rejected? It will increase smuggling. It will increase illegality. People not just playing by the rules and saying yes to the police officers and going through in an orderly fashion. It will be people hiding out or trying to get false paperwork. And so I don't know. It's you have to sort of think of this one step at a time in order to maintain any semblance of sanity, because you could see how this all could unravel very quickly, given the size of the numbers that are arriving.
Yeah, but here's the question, and how many? Is there a limit to how much that part of the world can absorb in people coming in immigration? Is there a number? I get the same questions here. Is there a number of is there like a finite number of people that we can absorb without creating chaos in your economy, in your country? Is there some thought into that?
It would be great to get like an economist to crunch that number, because some of the estimates I've seen are either obviously from refugee advocate groups and people who sort of want to see that number as high as possible. But here's Germany, a country of tens of millions of people, and I've heard some people say they could take 4 million people, and it wouldn't throw employment completely out of whack, and the sort of social services could work, and even there might be some changes in the tax to welfare structure for a few years, but it would balance itself out. The bigger question, though, is really how many of these countries are willing. And again, the EU right now is not about willing; it is about compulsion and acting in concert with one another. But that could change, and if the EU begins to look to be threatened, the EU leaders will turn over major decisions to countries, saying, "Look, okay, we realize that you're threatening to leave. We're going to allow you to make more decisions just in your own national interest." And I look at these 28 countries. I think Germany might be willing, sort of in the way France has, to become a very multicultural society and say, "Look, in the interest of some humanitarian needs here, and for our own economic sake, let's let Germany take in 5 million people from the Middle East and Central Asia. And we'll be okay with it. We'll realize this is what history forced us to do. But I don't think that calculation is going to be similar in many countries. 2? Is it 2? Is it 3 or 4 or 5? It's not 28. And I think it's a number very, very far below that.
Wow.
And that's, sort of the only answer you can think of now. And I think there is probably a high number out there, but I think very few countries are willing to actually follow through and let their populations change to that extent.
So how much of this is it that we're talking about people of color coming into these very white areas?
That could be it. There is a huge number of people who are of African descent who are stuck right now in Libya. I mean, these UN statistics that came out today are really interesting because they said 218,000 people reached Europe in October via the Mediterranean. Well, 210,000 came through the Balkans route. Only 8,000 made that super dangerous journey that we talked about for so long from North Africa to Italy. But we know there's something like 500,000 of them waiting in Libya. It's really dangerous because there's a civil war going on there and they're basically stuck because Europe decided to deploy its navy to block people from crossing. So we're just sort of penning them in there. But, that's the population where I think you're going to have much more of a visual problem. I think, maybe this is sort of shades of skin tone, and maybe this is not where I want to have this conversation go. But I do think there is a difference between, a situation like you have in France, where you have a white population and many of African descent, and in Germany, where you have obviously pale-skinned people like myself, but then folks from Iraq and Syria, it's not A, quite as noticeable, and B, I don't think quite as maybe unpalatable as it might be. But again, really only time will tell, and I think the numbers are really going to push people's mindset into maybe places they didn't even think they would one day sort of be.
I haven't really thought this completely through myself, but where's your position on this? What should these areas be doing? I mean, should Germany absorb 5 million? Should Sweden, do the same? What's your thought on it?
Well, my thought is that Europe can't do this alone. Not only can one country not do this alone, but I think you need the United States to get involved. We may have talked about this earlier this week, so interrupt me if I'm just repeating myself, but the sort of gold standard in refugee response is the Indo-Chinese resettlement in the late 70s. And that involved basically not the UN getting involved, not just the countries around Vietnam getting involved, but the US saying, look, we're across the ocean, but we're going to get a whole bunch of countries together to pledge huge, robust, multi-year mandatory quotas. That's not what we're seeing here now. You have just Europe dealing with this and trying to interface with Turkey to no effect. The U.S. is going to take in 10,000 people. We're not involved, and the UN is not involved, and Canada and Australia are not involved. You would need all of these countries to get together to actually deal with this amount of people. So I think the model here would be the Indo-Chinese resettlement, which is called an orderly resettlement or orderly departure program. You have the paperwork done before you make your journey. You are given a communication that your asylum application will be accepted before you embark on any sort of deathly voyage. And you are then brought right to the place where you're going to be resettled. Again, you can't expect people to log on the internet in Syria and apply this, but could you go to Turkey? Could the UN and other countries build a sort of asylum seeker application city in Turkey? It seems outlandish, but this is the sort of scale that is going to need to be talked about, and people start to need to get comfortable talking about in order to actually begin to see what could be solutions here. But it is going to need to be, it seems, something on that scale in order to address this properly.
It's interesting, and I'm glad that you're there. It's a perspective that we don't get in our media here, and I appreciate you sharing with us.
Thanks so much, and I hope I haven't bummed your listeners out as much as I've sort of bummed myself out this week.
You've bummed me out.
Search
So
for solutions is really where we need to be talking. And unfortunately, it's really uncomfortable to do that because it's just on such a large scale that the infeasibility of it begins to set in very quickly. And that is incredibly depressing.
Yeah, and you've made that unfortunately to me abundantly clear, and one of those things that another reality of the world we live in.
There's no escaping it.
Luke, I appreciate you taking time for us, man. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Have a good evening.
You too, and best of luck on your trip back. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show.
90% of the wealth, 10% of the people. 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people. 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
Poor old Jeb seems to have a terminal case of Mitt Romney disease. He just keeps blurting out asinine comments that reveal the fact that he is, in heart, soul, and political mindset, yet another son of a Bush. His inner bigotry against the poor, coupled with his cartoonish concept of the black community's political motivation, was outed recently when he was asked how he planned to win the votes of African Americans. "Our message is one of hope and aspiration," he responded. "Okay, Jeb, go positive. So far, so good." But then the deep prejudice derived from his narrow upbringing as a child of privilege surfaced. "My campaign message is not one of division and get in line and we'll take care of you with free stuff," he asserted with a sneer. Then, to punctuate his little lecture on how to appeal to low-income black families, the multimillionaire heir to the Bush fortune said he would tell them, "You can achieve earned success." Yes, Jeb, instead of hard-hit people who've been downsized or left jobless lining up to get what you call free stuff, like unemployment compensation and health care, better to challenge them to earn success. Tell them to have the gumption, as you did, to be born to rich parents, to be welcomed as legacy applicants into the most prestigious schools, and to have their fathers open the doors for them to achieve financial and political success. This is Jim Hightower saying, yet the former shoe-in for the GOP presidential nomination can't figure out why he's running third in New Hampshire and fifth in Iowa, even after he poured millions into a month-long blitz of TV ads to goose up his appeal. Such shallowness, callousness, and condescension exposes an ingrained contempt for all who don't live in Bush's elite zip code. No one but his fellow one-percenters want a clueless guy like that in the White House.
To get more of Jim Hightower's populist take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to, visit www.hightowerlowdown.org.
These are words you should have told the truth. Your language, and now we got the proof. Where you gonna run to? Where you
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So Randall sent me an email during the break talking about jobs and automation. I hit on it a little bit in the last section. What are we going to do when most of the jobs are going to be automated? He points out that Hers potato chips, of which he said he's taken the tour a couple of times, one of the big local potato chip producers down in the southeastern, and also here where I live in the center part of the state. They're one of the big producers of snack foods. He says, look, lots of machinery. They've got, the machines that you would expect with the big tubes and the shaking machines and the conveyor belts and all of that. And he says, look, there are no employees. Even the job of picking out the really well done, the overly burnt potato chips are done by a machine with optical scanners and all of that pick this stuff out. You don't even have people doing that work anymore. And, as he points out, you look at the last presidential debate, not one person's talking about automation. Not one person's talking about what happens when we bring manufacturing back and there are no jobs. We have a jobless resurgence of manufacturing. Nobody talking about that. We're talking about we want to reshore manufacturing, and I do. But they're not going to be the kind of manufacturing jobs that my grandparents had. They're not going to be the menial manual labor jobs that you can make a reasonable existence out of. They're not. They're going to be high tech, high computer, high skilled jobs that are only going to be for a handful and going to come with enormous costs to get the training and the education to be able to do it, because employers training you to run, those are days of the past, unless you're talking about the union apprenticeship programs, of which this week is the National Union Apprenticeship, or the National Apprenticeship Appreciation Week. But we know the unions are the ones who really do the apprenticeship programs well. I know the ABC contractors like to say that they have one, not very good, and a graduation rate fairly pathetic. It is a shill of what it is. But you look at this, and the reality is when you start talking about the jobs coming back, I love hearing the politicians, especially on the right, talking about, and the left, because they've bought into we need tax cuts to create jobs, and we need to give incentives to these employers to steal jobs from other communities. You don't hear much about these huge tax breaks that are just replacing us. And it's something I think we really, as a nation, really need to be talking about and thinking about. I like my idea. Start looking at changing the maximum hour laws. Start looking at how we can subsidize families through guaranteed income programs to make sure that folks can exist. Just those kind of ideas. And thank you, Randall. I appreciate the email. And you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I do answer all emails personally and appreciate it. If you missed any portion of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for being here. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's color like the tide of flood beneath the lunar sway. Imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. Democracy is coming to the USA.